Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Combined All His Quirks? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku had always thought that if something life-changing ever happened to him, he'd notice. He'd feel it in his bones. His heart would pound. There'd be an explosion of music, maybe. At least fireworks in the background. Instead, it happened in the frozen food aisle. Izuku's arms were full of plastic grocery bags when he rounded the corner too fast. He'd been checking his phone, eyes flicking to his budget app to make sure he still had enough yen for miso paste. His mom had written, "Don't forget the tofu," with a little doodle heart at the bottom of the list. And then he collided with someone. Izuku's bags split open, cans and vegetables clattering across the floor like spilled dice. "Oh no! I'm so sorry." Izuku immediately dropped to his knees, scrambling after a runaway carton of eggs. His voice cracked halfway through his apology. "I wasn't looking, please, let me." The man he'd run into was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed casually enough to blend in. Black hoodie, baseball cap pulled low, scarf hiding the lower half of his face. Nothing about him screamed danger. In fact, if Izuku looked at him just right, he seemed ordinary. But something was off. Not visually. Nothing he could put a name to his sigh was perfectly normal. No, it was a feeling, a pressure. Like standing in the shadow of a collapsing skyscraper and knowing you couldn't move fast enough to avoid it. All for one crouched down slowly, expression hidden, but his gloved hands scooped up a box of instant ramen with deliberate care. He didn't look at the boy, not at first. He looked at the ramen, the comfort food he so desperately needed right now, fingers tightening around it until the cardboard creaked. "Watch where you're going," he said evenly. Izuku bowed so low his forehead almost touched the linoleum. "Why, sir? I'm so sorry. It was my fault." All for one should have brushed him off. Walked away. Pretended this had never happened. But the ache in his skull, the throbbing migraine of yet another failed experiment gnawed at him. That idiot doctor had pushed too far, too fast. The Nomo hadn't survived the strain of just 5 quirks. Pathetic. All for one had been cultivating it for weeks, and in one night it had collapsed into a useless heap of flesh. And then this child had the audacity to bump into him. He tilted his head slightly, finally letting his hidden gaze fall on Izuku. The boy's hands shook as he tried to salvage the groceries. His voice was thin, high with panic. His freckles stood out starkly against pale, worried skin. Perfect. All for one smile twisted unseen beneath his scarf. It had been a while since he caused needless, mindless harm. How cathartic. His collection of quirks weighed on him, a cluttered hoard of trash he'd accumulated over centuries. Weak, mundane abilities, the ability to change toenail color, to whistle louder, to digest gravel without harm. They were useless to him. But they'd make for an exquisite punishment. All for one reached out casually, brushing his hand against Izuku's shoulder as the boy clutched an armful of spilled vegetables. The surge was immediate. Dozens, then hundreds of quirks funneled out of him like sand through a sieve, pouring into the boy's body. It was subtle enough that no one watching would notice the contact. Izuku himself didn't notice the touch, only freezing a moment at something he couldn't explain. He didn't understand. He never would. "Don't worry yourself over it," All for one said quietly, withdrawing his hand as if nothing had happened. "No harm done." Izuku blinked, confused. The world swam a little at the edges, nausea prickling behind his eyes. But he forced a smile, nodding quickly. "All right, let me help you with those." He stacked the man's groceries carefully back into their bags, hands trembling harder than before. He felt cold for some reason, like something was in him that didn't belong. All for one took the bags smoothly, straightening with deliberate calm. The urge to laugh was almost overwhelming. He could already picture it, the boy writhing in bed, every organ tearing itself apart under the weight of incompatible quirks. It would take hours, days maybe. A slow death. And it would feel so good to imagine while he savored his ramen tonight. "Be careful next time," All for one said, tone almost kind. Then he turned, walking toward the register without another glance. Izuku exhaled shakily, shoulders sagging. His head had started to hurt. He bowed again even though the man wasn't looking, muttering another apology under his breath before gathering what remained of his own groceries. What a weird encounter. By the time Izuku got home, the headache had settled in. A deep, pounding throb right behind his eyes. He excused it as stress. He was stressed school, exams, and the fact that tomorrow he'd have to face Kachan again. He collapsed on his bed after putting away the groceries, staring at the ceiling. His limbs tingled, buzzing like static electricity. His stomach twisted, rolling like he'd swallowed something rotten. He whispered to himself, the words automatic, familiar. It's fine. It's fine. I can handle it. Heroes don't give up just because they're uncomfortable. But deep in his bones, something shifted. Hundreds of sparks flickered awake in the darkness of his body, like embers dumped into cold ash. The hist snapped, crawled. Izuku couldn't know, that the stranger in the grocery store had just rewritten his entire future. That the next few weeks would be hell. That surviving it would give him what he'd always dreamed of and more. Izuku only turned over, clutching his pillow tight. His last thought before sleep dragged him under was a simple one. Tomorrow. Just make it through tomorrow. And somewhere across the city, all for one sipped tea and smiled, imagining the boys suffering. Neither of them realized how wrong he was. Izuku woke up the next morning shivering. At first, he thought it was just the early chill of a spring morning, the kind that made him burrow deeper under his blanket. But when he tried to move, every muscle screamed. His head throbbed, sweat slicking his hair against his forehead even though his teeth rattled like he was freezing. "Mom?" he croaked, voice scratchy. He heard footsteps coming down the hall. She noticed his state the moment he walked in. She pressed a cool hand against his forehead, and her face fell. "Izuku, honey, you're burning up. You can't go to school today." He tried to protest, but it came out as a weak cough. But no buts, she said, firmly, tugging the blanket tighter around him. "I'll call in sick for you." Izuku closed his eyes, guilt bubbling up. He hated making her worry. She already had so much on her shoulders. He wanted to tell her it was nothing, just a cold, but the fever gnawed deeper, pulling him down into restless sleep. The first seizure hit around noon. Inko had been sitting beside his bed with a damp towel when Izuku's entire body went stiff, his back arching violently. His eyes rolled back, mouth opening on a strangled gasp that turned into choking. Inko panicked, grabbing his shoulders. Izuku shot, "Where's my phone dash?" By the time the ambulance arrived, he was trembling uncontrollably, sweat soaking the sheets. His breaths came in ragged, uneven pulls, lips pale. The ride to the hospital blurred. Sirens, Mom's frantic voice, a paramedic shining a light into his eyes. Then blackness again. The next week was hell. Izuku drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes he woke to fluorescent lights and the steady beep of a heart monitor. Sometimes he woke screaming, pain tearing through every nerve in his body like fire. He clawed at the sheets, at his skin, desperate to crawl out of himself. Other times, there was nothing but a heavy, suffocating void. Doctors hovered, but not with urgency. They ran scans, muttered about neural overload and possible epileptic complications. None of it made sense. None of it explained why every cell in his body felt like it was exploding. He caught pieces of their conversations. Probably just stress-induced seizures. Quirkless kids sometimes have abnormalities. It's not uncommon. No family history of epilepsy? Well, it could have been dormant. The words blurred together, meaningless jargon. Nobody seemed interested in digging deeper. He was quirkless. Who cared? Inko cared. She barely left his side. She fed him spoonfuls of soup when he was awake enough to swallow, wiped his forehead with gentle hands, whispered encouragement when he cried out from another wave of pain. "It's okay, Izuku. You're strong. You'll get through this." He wanted to believe her. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. One morning, Izuku opened his eyes to find the pain gone. No fever. No tingling nerves. Just quiet. The nurse taking his vitals frowned at the sudden change but said nothing beyond, "Well, looks like you've stabilized." 2 days later, he was discharged with vague instructions. Rest, monitor for more seizures, come back if it happens again. That was it. Home felt different after a hospital bed. The soft hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, the smell of miso soup, everything grounded him. But something was still wrong. Izuku couldn't explain it, not even to himself. Beneath his skin he felt crowded. Like he wasn't alone. 1,000 faint impressions lingered, like static in the back of his skull. If he concentrated, he could almost separate them. A flutter of warmth, a chill of something sour, a faint whisper of joy or anger. Not voices, exactly. More like ghosts of emotions. He didn't dare mention it. Inko would only worry more. Besides, after the week he'd had, hallucinations didn't sound that strange. Heroes don't complain about discomfort, he reminded himself. They smile through it. That night, lying in bed, he couldn't sleep. The not voices itched at him, tugging at his attention. He squeezed his pillow tighter, then, against his better judgment, focused on one. It felt like trying to catch smoke. Slippery, shifting. But he tugged harder, willing himself to grab it. And then something clicked. Warmth spread through his chest, not painful this time. Almost comforting. Izuku sat up, heart racing. What was that? The warmth lingered, then slowly faded, leaving him breathless. He lay back down, staring at the ceiling. It was probably nothing. Just leftover stress. But his hands trembled with adrenaline, mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. Sleep came eventually, heavy and dreamless. If he had looked at his reflection in the dark window, he would have seen something very strange. The faint streaks of gold threading through his left eye, shimmering in the moonlight, harmless, almost pretty. And just as quickly as the flecks of gold came, they left, and with it, the warmth in Izuku's chest. The next morning, Izuku woke up expecting the strange sensations to fade. They hadn't. If anything, the stream of threads beneath his skin felt stronger, clearer. Like hundreds of tiny rivers flowing through him, braided together into something vast. It didn't feel out of place. Instead, it was comforting, like curling into a warm blanket that hummed with life. Yawning, Izuku shuffled into the bathroom with his toothbrush. His hair stuck out in every direction, eyes heavy with sleep. He filled a glass with water and started brushing, foam bubbling around his mouth. That was when the thought struck him. What happens if I tug on one again? Cautiously, he reached for the thread he'd tugged on last night, the one that left warmth coiled in his chest. He pulled. The warmth flowed back into him, and Izuku exhaled softly through his nose. It felt right. Then, out of curiosity, he let it go. The thread uncoiled, slipping neatly back into the stream, and the warmth faded. He blinked in surprise. So I can take it and put it back? Like pulling a bead on and off a string? Frowning thoughtfully, Izuku tugged it forward again. The warmth returned, stronger now that he recognized it. And that's when he looked up at the mirror. The toothbrush clattered against porcelain, foam splattering the sink. His eyes green, familiar, wide, were flecked with gold. Tiny sparks of color shimmered like sunlight in water. Can eyes change colors that quickly? Izuku's heart slammed against his ribs. What? He uncoiled the thread in a panic. The gold faded, leaving only his usual green staring back at him. He grabbed the sink for balance, chest heaving. That wasn't normal. That wasn't stress. That wasn't a hallucination. Hands trembling, Izuku rinsed his mouth quickly and bolted downstairs. Inko was still half asleep at the kitchen table, nursing a mug of coffee that hadn't yet cooled enough to drink. She blinked at her son's sudden arrival, hair sticking up like he'd run through a storm. "Mom," Izuku blurted, nearly tripping over his words. I got my quirk." She blinked again, slowly. "What? My quirk?" His voice cracked, excitement spilling out faster than his thoughts. "I was brushing my teeth and..." He stopped himself, trying to focus. Just watch." He closed his eyes, fumbling through the stream. The warmth thread was there, familiar. He tugged harder this time. Something shifted inside him, coiling tight in his chest. It didn't feel exactly the same, hotter, more alive, but he chalked it up to being unfamiliar with his quirk. When he opened his eyes, Inko gasped. "Oh, honey," she pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "That's wonderful." Izuku let out a relieved sigh and a grin. At least he wasn't hallucinating this whole thing. "Your eyes, sweetheart," she said softly. "They're glowing. Just like your grandfather's. He had heat vision, remember? You probably got it from him." "Glowing?" Izuku's voice was faint. That wasn't what he had seen in the mirror at all. He spun on his heel and ran for the bathroom. The moment he caught sight of himself, his jaw dropped. His eyes weren't just flecked with gold anymore. They were glowing faint, steady light pouring from the irises like lanterns. He leaned closer, breathing hard. This doesn't make sense. Experimentally, he uncoiled the thread. The glow faded, leaving his eyes their usual green again. Relief and fear tangled in his chest. That's one. That's a quirk. Think. Izuku couldn't stop there. Back in his room, he sat cross-legged on the floor, face determined. He tugged at the glowing eyes thread again, memorizing the way it felt coiled in his chest. Then he let it go. Now, he dug deeper into the stream. They're a different thread, faint but familiar. The one from last night, the harmless streaks of color. He pulled. His reflection in the window shimmered. Flecks of red burst across his irises. Izuku grinned despite himself. "Eye color manipulation. Hey, this I can handle." He concentrated, trying to shift it. The flecks melted into gold. "It worked," he whispered, stunned. A versatile eye quirk. He'd seen dozens of cosmetic quirks online, but they usually stuck to one effect. Being able to colors and light emission? That was strange. Not unheard of though. It's unusual to have multifaceted quirk, but not impossible. Izuku frowned as a thought came to him, tugging the glowing eyes thread again. It coiled neatly alongside the color change thread. His reflection stared back with eyes glowing faintly gold, streaks threading through like veins of sunlight. Two quirks. Both active at once. That's unusual. Izuku's pulse thundered in his ears as he reached again, combing through the stream. His mind snagged on another thread, one that felt sharper, focused. He tugged. A crosshair shimmered in the center of his vision, faint and translucent. He blinked, startled, and the world seemed to sharpen. The bathroom glass sparkled brighter, every detail more distinct. He blinked again. A tiny, right where the crosshair had been, turned to glass. Izuku leaned forward in shock. The porcelain of the sink had a new blemish, a perfectly smooth spot, almost invisible, except for the way it caught the light differently. He rubbed it with his thumb. It didn't come off. It wasn't a trick of the eyes. It was real. His chest tightened. That's a material-altering quirk. Not cosmetic. Not related at all. He staggered back from the mirror, mind spinning. Separate quirks. Each thread is a quirk. His reflection stared back, eyes faintly glowing gold and streaked with red, a ghost of the crosshair still hovering in his vision. Izuku's breath came quick, almost panicked. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense at all. But if each stream was a quirk, how the hell did he get so many? Izuku had always loved journaling every quirk he could find. He was no exception. The day he was released from the hospital, Izuku pulled a spare notebook from his desk. A clean slate. On the title he wrote Quirk Analysis, Izuku Midoriya. He'd always dreamed of having a quirk of his own to analyze. So he wrote. At first, it was just short lines. Weird warm feeling under ribs. Like static but thicker. Then, feels like different emotions. Not voices. More like personalities? But not? Hard to explain. It escalated quickly. By the end of the first day home, the first page was filled front to back with little notes, sketches, and theories. Inko hovered at his door that evening, worry etched deep into her face. Izuku, sweetheart, are you sure you're not overdoing it? You've only just gotten home. Maybe you should rest. I am resting, Mom, Izuku said quickly, flipping the notebook closed before she could peek. Just writing stuff down. It helps me calm down. She eyed him suspiciously. You're not stressing about school again, are you? No. His laugh came out a bit too high, though he wasn't sure what he was worried about. Just doodles. That seemed to satisfy her, if only because she wanted to believe him. She kissed his hair, then retreated toward the kitchen. Izuku waited until her footsteps faded before reopening the notebook. By the next morning, the doodles had turned into a catalog. He discovered his quirks the way a child might rummage through a box of mismatched toys, pulling one out, turning it over, testing it until it clicked, then putting it aside for the next. Some were obvious. Others refused to respond no matter how hard he tugged. Strict activation requirements, perhaps, or maybe they were mental. Izuku started to notice a pattern in his quirks. There were a few that felt similar. He flipped to a new page to jot his thoughts down. Eye glow, makes eyes glow faintly. Pretty cool in the mirror. Not night vision, exactly. More like built-in flashlights. Eye color streaks, adds colored streaks to irises. Currently blue. Purely cosmetic. Crosshairs blink, overlays a crosshair into vision. Blinking leaves slivers of glass where the crosshair was aimed. Glass is only a thin circular sheet, easy to dispose of. Second eyelid, removable, weirdest one so far. Transparent. Feels like sliding a contact lens out, but it's my own skin. When quirk is active, it can regrow in a few hours. Falls out either mentally or through deactivating quirk. No pain. He stared at the page for a long time, tapping his pencil against the margin. They feel similar. They all come from the same part of me. Once he'd noticed that, it was impossible to ignore. The quirks had textures. Not physical but internal. Tugging on eye glow felt like grabbing a warm thread, while the color streaks quirk hummed faintly in the same place, just cooler. When he reached for one, sometimes the others slipped free instead. They were different quirks. But they weren't. Izuku chewed the end of his pencil, heart racing. So what if I think of them as one quirk? An eye modification quirk. That's all anyone has to know. Changing color, glowing people already have quirks like this. It won't draw suspicion. He scribbled it down in bold letters. Official quirk, eye mod. But there were others. So many others. Paint fingertips. Fingertips secrete watery pigment. Red, blue, green so far. Doesn't wash out easily. Flammable spit. Spit ignites if exposed to flame. Makes me more of a fire hazard than usual. Spit secreted while quirk is on reverts to normal spit when deactivated. Self-damage resistance. Heal faster from self-inflicted injuries done by my body. Doesn't work if I intentionally paper-cut myself, but does if I scratch myself using my fingernails. Doesn't help against outside damage. Useful for when I accidentally bite my tongue. Hair reset. No matter what, my hair bounces back to its original style in minutes. Not useful. Very annoying. Some quirks were useless. Some were inconvenient. A handful were mildly beneficial under very specific circumstances. But each had that same tug, that same weight under his ribs. And then there was the thought that wouldn't leave him alone. They can overlap. I've done it before by changing the color of the glow in my eyes. Who says I can't do it with other quirks too? Experiment 1 happened by accident. Izuku had been doodling a chart, connecting quirks that felt similar. When he circled paint fingertips and flammable spit, something inside him clicked. He didn't mean to activate it, but suddenly his index finger was warm. Too warm. Ah! He yelped, staring in horror as a tiny flame flickered to life on his fingertip. His notebook almost went up in smoke. He smacked it until the flames went out, heart hammering, and the quirks slipped out of his grasp. The flames on his fingers died instantly. His fingertip was fine. Not even singed. Izuku sat frozen, sweat dripping down his temple. Then, cautiously, he brought the quirks back together. This time it was deliberate. The fingertip caught fire again. He shook it desperately, expecting pain, but there was none. The flame licked harmlessly at his skin, warm but not burning. He grabbed his water glass with his other hand and doused it, just to be safe. Then he flipped to a clean page of his notebook and started scribbling furiously. New combination, finger flame. Source, paint fingertips plus flammable spit. Result, Fireproof fingertips. Spit loses flammability while active. Fire ignites from fingertip. Cannot spread beyond skin unless fuel present. Observations. Cannot turn off flame while quirk is active. Will continue to heat up water if placed inside it, even if the visual flame is extinguished. Izuku leaned back, notebook pressed to his chest, thinking. This wasn't just quirks. This was inheritance. Like quirks mixing in a child, only he was the parent and the child all at once. 2 weak quirks in, 1 new quirk out. Like evolution. Izuku's hands shook, excitement boiling in his veins. This is groundbreaking. If I were reading this about someone else, I'd lose my mind. The research possibilities. But no one could ever know, or he'd live the rest of his life in a lab. He stared down at his notes, determination settling over him. To the world, I only have 1 quirk, I mod. The rest were his secret. And if he was careful, if he kept experimenting, maybe he could turn a pile of worthless quirks into something real. Something powerful. Maybe he could be a hero after all. Izuku's pencil tapped against his desk, a nervous rhythm no one noticed. It was his first day back after a week in the hospital, but no one asked him where he'd been. Not a single classmate turned in their seat, not one whispered, "Are you okay?" Or even, "What happened?" All eyes were on Bakugo. The news had been everywhere. Sludge villain rampage in Mizudafu. Grainy cell phone videos replayed on every screen, showing a writhing mass of sludge engulfing Bakugo, his muffled screams lost under wet gurgling. Then All Might appearing in a burst of light, blasting the villain apart in 1 punch. The whole class whispered about it in clusters before homeroom. Did you see how All Might just bam? The whole thing went flying. Bakugo really almost died. That's crazy. They're saying on the news he's lucky to be alive. Bakugo sat stiff in his chair, jaw tight, eyes like firecrackers ready to blow. He hadn't said a word yet, but his hands twitched at his sides. Izuku didn't need to guess why. Kaken didn't want their sympathy. He didn't want to be the victim who got saved. By lunch, the whole class had made it unbearable. Man, Bakugo, you're seriously tough. Anyone else would have died. Yeah, and All Might himself saved you. You're practically famous. Do you think the pros will remember your name after this? Bakugo's shoulders hunched tighter with each word, until his head snapped toward Izuku, sitting alone at the edge of the cafeteria. There was that sharp, feral grin Izuku knew too well. The one that meant someone else is about to pay for my bad mood. Deku. Izuku froze on instinct, fingers tightening around his untouched chopsticks. Keikaken, you think this is funny? Bakugo's voice was loud enough to draw eyes. You think it's hilarious that I almost got killed and then dragged out like some helpless extra? No. Izuku stammered, shaking his head frantically. I would never. But Bakugo was already moving. He grabbed Izuku's juice box off the table, tore it open, and tipped it over Izuku's head. Cold liquid splashed down his hair, his shirt, his lap. The cafeteria roared with laughter. Izuku gasped, scrambling to his feet, sticky juice dripping into his socks. That's enough, Bakugo, their homeroom teacher said half-heartedly from the corner. Midoriya, clean yourself up. Izuku's stomach twisted. He bent to pick up a rag from the cleaning cart by the wall. His hands shook as he dabbed at the spreading puddle. It wasn't until he knelt on the floor, cloth in hand, that he realized something was off. His clothes were soaked, but not as soaked as they should have been. The juice had drenched his shirt, but the fabric didn't cling heavy to his chest. His hair dripped, but it wasn't clumped together in sticky strands. It was almost like someone had splashed him, not poured juice over him. Izuku's mind raced. Is this a new quirk? Some sort of anti-stick one? He risked glancing around. No one was watching him now. Bakugo had already strutted off, soaking in the attention of his friends. Izuku closed his eyes. Beneath his ribs, the strange core of quirks churned. He'd gotten into the habit of keeping the unknown ones wound tight around it, just in case he stumbled upon an activation requirement. That foresight had paid off, it seemed. He started unraveling the threads, discarding them one by one. Suddenly his shirt clung to his chest, heavy and sticky. The juice plastered his hair flat against his forehead. Izuku's breath hitched. he scrambled to remember the sensation of the quirk he just unraveled. He discarded the remaining quirks around his core, letting them slip back into the buzzing mass, and grabbed for the sensation he remembered. The fabric loosened immediately, as though invisible oil coated him, repelling the liquid. His heart hammered in the excitement of a new quirk as he pressed his rag into the puddle. This time, he felt the quirk inside him stir, almost. Not physically, not even a sensation. He just knew that it had, and that it was working. As he watched, juice shifted slowly away from his skin, crawling back toward the cloth like it didn't want to touch him. Slow, but noticeable. Izuku bit back a grin, pulse racing as he carefully finished wiping up the spill. His classmates were still talking loudly about Bakugo. No one noticed the way the juice bent slightly around his fingers, the way droplets rolled stubbornly off his skin instead of soaking in. By the time the floor was clean, his appetite was gone. He dumped his untouched tray into the trash, ignoring the pang in his stomach. He needed his notebook. He needed to write this down now. Izuku slipped out of the cafeteria, damp shirt clinging and releasing in uneven patches as he flexed the new sensation around his core. Hydrophobic quirk. He'd memorized its texture. Another piece for the puzzle. The cafeteria was loud with voices, but Izuku wasn't among them. He'd slipped outside after dumping his untouched tray, notebook clutched tight to his chest. The side of the school was quiet, the sun warm against the concrete wall where he settled down cross-legged. No classmates, no Bakugo, no teachers half-heartedly telling him to clean up messes he hadn't made. Just Izuku, his notes, and the strange buzz of quirks beneath his skin. He flipped open his notebook, hands already itching to write. Entry number 17, Hydrophobia. Initial impression, repels liquid, makes skin hair less absorbent. When active, water juice shifts slightly away from my skin. Potential, dry off faster after showers. Kachan's pranks are less effective. He chewed the end of his pen. It wasn't flashy, not compared to explosions or flight or lasers, but it was useful. In comparison to a lot of his other quirks. But Izuku wasn't satisfied with just useful. Not when he knew it could be more. He felt what happened with finger flame quirks could merge, twist, evolve. He swallowed, steadying himself, and reached for the paint secretion quirk. His palm tingled as he let it unfurl alongside hydrophobia, then pushed. Forced them to merge. His fingertips grew damp. He frowned. A clear, watery liquid dripped onto the pavement, pooling like condensation. Not paint, not a repellent field. Just water. Did they cancel out? He muttered, tapping the puddle with his pen. No, wait, it's still secretion. But different. He tore off a corner of notebook paper, scrawled a tiny smiley face, and coated the paper in the liquid. It sank straight in without disturbing the drawing. He grabbed his water bottle and tipped a splash onto the coated corner. The water rolled across the paper, refusing to soak in. The smiley face stayed crisp, the page unwrinkled. Izuku's eyes lit up. A lamination quirk. That's brilliant. He scribbled furiously. Lamination quirk, paint plus hydrophobia. Clear liquid secretion. Coats surfaces to make them water resistant. Protects paper, prevents smudging, maybe clothing? Keeps notebooks safe from Kachan. He stared at the notes, pen hovering. If I can merge too, what about more? His stomach fluttered nervously. He remembered the hospital bed, the seizures, the strange buzzing under his skin. He remembered the fire on his fingertip, the water leaving his paper untouched, the sensation of two quirks made one. Making a second-generation quirk is possible, he whispered to himself, as though reciting math homework. What about a third? He bit his lip and reached deeper. Hydrophobia, paint secretion, and flammable spit. They felt similar. Not as similar as the eye quirks felt to each other, but similar enough that he felt he could make it work. He braided them together, the threads twisting tight around his core until his chest ached. The effort was harder, like trying to find three pieces that fit together in a mixed-up 1,000-piece puzzle, but it held. Izuku exhaled shakily, staring at his fingertips. Nothing happened. Then drip. A black, viscous liquid oozed from under his nails, thick as oil, sticky and slow. Izuku grimaced, wiping his hand against his already stained shirt. The liquid smeared, leaving a dark sheen. He tore another piece of paper, dipped it in the small puddle. The fibers darkened instantly, the page sagging soggy and limp. Not waterproof. Not laminated. Not lamination, Izuku muttered, brow furrowed. So what? On impulse, he released hydrophobia, letting it snap back into the buzzing cloud. His fingertip flared with orange heat as the remaining quirks settled into finger flame. The oily puddle lit up in an instant. A column of fire rose from the small puddle, bright and wild. Izuku yelped, scrambling back against the wall, notebook clutched to his chest. He grabbed his water bottle, dumping it over the flames. The water hissed uselessly, droplets trickling straight through the fuel to the pavement around it. What? Why isn't it? He stomped at the edge with his shoe until the fuel stuck to his sole and flames licked up the side. No, no, no. Izuku ripped the shoe off, hurling it into the flames. The stench of burning rubber thickened the air, acrid and choking. Panic clawed at his throat. He couldn't put it out, he couldn't let it spread. Paint secretion. Thicker than water. Maybe it would work. Izuku let go of the flammable spit quirk and focused on the one remaining thread around his core. He moved out his hand, forcing thick gobs of paint to pour from his fingertips, smothering the flames with layer after layer of sticky liquid. The fire hissed and sputtered, shrinking under the smothering weight until only blackened goo remained. Izuku collapsed back onto the pavement, chest heaving. His notebook was still clutched in one hand, unscathed. His hands shook as he scrawled down his notes. Firestarter, paint plus flammable spit plus hydrophobia. Produces oily black liquid. Extremely flammable. Burns hotter brighter than expected. Hydrophobia makes flame difficult to extinguish. Water ineffective. Must smother with paint thicker substance. Warning, dangerous. Test with caution. Izuku stared at the words, the smell of burnt rubber still stinging his nose. He flexed his fingers, black stains still under his nails. He should have been terrified. He was terrified. His heart wouldn't slow, his shirt stuck uncomfortably with sweat and fuel. But still, beneath it all, something hummed in his chest. Excitement. The end of classes never meant freedom for Izuku. It meant waiting. Watching the clock tick closer to dismissal, heart thudding with dread as he wondered if today would be one of those days when Kaken decided he needed to remind the Deku of his place. Today felt like one of those days. The final bell rang, and the classroom buzzed with chatter and scraping chairs. Izuku slid his notebook into his bag, keeping his head low, hoping maybe Bakugo would be too caught up in the attention he'd gotten all day from the sludge villain incident. Everyone still hovered around him, asking questions, throwing praises and sympathy like confetti. Izuku slipped out and down the hall into the stairwell. Oi, Deku! Izuku froze up as Bakugo stormed down the stairs, his usual entourage trailing behind him. His footsteps echoed off the walls. Izuku turned around, eyes darting around for an escape route. Kaken. What? Bakugo sneered, leaning close. You think you're better than me, 'cause of that villain? Think you get to hide in the background while everyone looks at me like I'm weak? Don't, Izuku started, but the words choked in his throat. He didn't resist when Bakugo's fist shoved him back against the wall. It wasn't worth resisting. Not when 3 of Bakugo's followers were already closing in like vultures. The first shove knocked his bag to the ground. The second came with sparks dancing across Bakugo's palm. Izuku braced himself for the burns, heart hammering. Then came the explosion. It wasn't huge. Just a controlled pop of fire and smoke meant to sting, to scare. But it landed square against Izuku's chest. For a split second, all Izuku felt was heat. Then the world lit up. His shirt went up like paper soaked in gasoline. Orange and yellow fire licked across the cotton, climbing higher in an instant. Izuku yelped, ripping at the hem, scrambling to get it off. He tore the shirt over his head, tossing it to the floor. It hit with a flash, bursting into a column of flames that roared upwards for a moment before fizzling out. Izuku stumbled back, patting at his arms, his chest, his stomach. His skin tingled, but he found no fresh burns. No searing agony. Relief flooded him in shaky waves. Then he noticed that Bakugo wasn't hitting him anymore. The blonde had frozen mid-step, eyes wide. Not at the pile of ashes, but at Izuku himself. His chest, pale under the fluorescent lights, was mapped with scars. Faint, silvery lines traced across his ribs, scattered patches of pink from burns long healed, cuts that had knitted but left reminders behind. It had been months since Bakugo had seen them so clearly. Months since Izuku had been cornered without his uniform shirt to cover the evidence. For once, Bakugo didn't sneer. He didn't shout. His eyes darted from scar to scar, then back to the ruined shirt. The dust reflected in his gaze, and something in his expression faltered. If Izuku had been slower, if the fire had stuck, he'd be on the floor screaming, skin melting into fabric, ambulance sirens screaming down the block. Bakugo shuddered. Just for a second. Then, like snapping a rubber band, he scoffed and turned his head away, face twisted back into a mask of irritation. Tisich, shitty Deku. Can't even wear a shirt without turning it into a fire hazard. His voice was rougher than usual, quieter. Almost like he was talking more to himself than to Izuku. Come on, Bakugo barked, shoving one of his lackeys toward the door. The others hesitated, staring at the still-burning shirt, before scurrying after him. Izuku stood frozen for a moment longer, then exhaled slowly. His hands still trembled as he bent down, snatching his backpack off the floor. From the bottom pocket, he pulled out a spare shirt, a plain gray one, wrinkled from being stuffed into the bag. He always carried one. Just in case his shirt looked messed up and he had to make sure his mom didn't freak. He tugged it on quickly, the cotton clinging uncomfortably to his sweat-damp skin. It was too small, tight across his shoulders, but it was better than attracting stares. He kept his head down, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the acrid smell of his ruined shirt smoldering on the floor. His pen scratched against the page of his notebook the moment he sat down at his desk, scribbling observations even as his hand shook. Observation. Fire starter residue highly flammable. Reacts violently to sparks heat. Emergency precaution. Never leave fuel-stained clothing on. Carry spares. Izuku pressed the pen harder against the paper, like the act of writing could block out the shaking in his hands. He didn't want to think about it right now. Chapter text. Saturday morning sunlight streamed through the Midoriya apartment curtains. Mom had opened them before she left for errands, humming as she told Izuku to eat breakfast and do some studying. Don't you have a math quiz on Monday? He had nodded, smiling like a dutiful son. But as soon as the door clicked shut, Izuku darted to his desk, notebook ready. His computer hummed to life, the screen filling with tabs almost immediately. Okay, multiple quirks, he muttered, fingers flying over the keyboard. If I'm not the only one, then there's data, right? Records, case studies. It didn't take long to find what he wanted. Scholarly articles, Hero Wiki fan speculation threads, and old news clippings. Izuku devoured them. 2 quirks were already rare. The government estimated less than 1 in every 20,000 had 2. 3 quirks? Only a few dozen confirmed cases in the entire world. Most of those weren't true 3-quirk users, they were combinations that looked like more. A fire and ice wielder creating steam wasn't 3 quirks, just clever usage. Copy-type quirks blurred the line further. 4. Izuku whispered, scrolling furiously. No one. Not one. Well, except, maybe all might. People argued endlessly about that. Was invulnerability its own quirk, or just the product of insane strength and conditioning? Some analysts claimed his speed, durability, and strength were 3 separate quirks bundled together. A few went further, saying elemental resistance was a 4th. Izuku leaned back, heart pounding. He was a unique case then. No online guidance to help him. He could feel them under his skin, dozens of threads humming, waiting. He glanced at his chest. He couldn't see the core, of course, but he could feel it, that dense knot of energy inside him, bright and buzzing. He'd always had to do things alone. This was no different. He'd figure out this quirk, guidance or not. Izuku started by picking out threads he'd never touched before. Unknown quirks, humming just out of reach. He got to 20 wrapped around his core. And then his arms split open. Bone spikes, white and jagged, erupted out of the skin of his forearm. Pain lanced up his nerves so sharp he nearly screamed. Sheet! He fumbled, unraveling the last thread frantically, shoving it out of his core. The sensation disappeared as abruptly as it had appeared. The spikes retracted, skin smoothing out, quirk retreating into the stream. Only the ache remained. Izuku slumped forward, clutching his arm. His breath came ragged, sweat cooling on his forehead. Sheet, he panted. He forced himself upright, grabbed his pen, and scribbled furiously into his notebook before the memory blurred. Bone spikes quirk. Mutation type. Causes sharp bone growths to erupt from skin on forearm. Incredibly painful. Causes no visible damage afterwards, but leaves a dull ache. Retracted when discarded. Must avoid accidentally activating. Warning, use with extreme caution. Izuku underlined the last line 3 times. He sat back, wiping his forehead with a trembling hand. That could have been so much worse. If it had been his ribs or his face. He couldn't think about that. He had to stay systematic. Careful. Izuku pulled up another tab, a public database on common quirks. Weak, everyday quirks most people never thought twice about. Paper cut immunity. The ability to smell sour milk from across the room. Hair that never grew past shoulder length. Baseline quirks, Izuku murmured, scanning the list. If I know what to test for, I can match them. He began trials. He held water in his mouth, spat into a cup, and sniffed. The liquid smelled normal. Then he swished again, picked out an unknown quirk, and spat. Nothing happened. This was said to be an easy way to test for salivary quirks, the most common group among secretion-type emitters. Odds were he'd have at least a few of them in his arsenal. Izuku switched to another unknown quirk and tried again. Nothing. The 17th time he spit, he expected another failure. The stench hit him like a punch. Sour, chemical, stomach-turning. Izuku gagged, clutching the desk. His stomach flipped, and nausea clawed up his throat until he staggered for the bathroom. When the retching passed, he wiped his mouth with shaking hands. Nausea spit. Emitter type, secretion. Induces nausea in anyone who smells it. Works on myself, which SCKS. Limited to saliva, which acquires an unpleasantly bitter taste. Possibly compatible with flammable spit, quirks feel similar. Back at the desk, Izuku tested new quirks, this time with a mirror in front of him. He reached for another unknown thread and carefully wrapped it around his core. Heat bloomed in his eyeballs. His vision tinted faint red, everything faintly shimmering like summer asphalt. He started, rubbing at his eyes, but there was no pain, just uncomfortable warmth. Minor emission. Eyes heat slightly, vision shifts red. No immediate offensive ability observed. Low level, might merge well with other ocular quirks. One more. He tugged another thread. His hair immediately clumped together, damp and heavy, as though he'd stepped out of the shower without rinsing shampoo. He inspected his head in the mirror. It didn't seem to affect his eyebrows, just the mop of hair on his scalp. No matter how much he shook or ruffled, it stuck in gross, sticky strands. Izuku groaned. That's useless. Sticky hair. Mutation. Causes hair to clump together. Only affects the hair on the top of my head. Aesthetic inconvenience only. He closed the notebook and leaned back in his chair. He reached out to his new quirks, wrapping them around his core and releasing them. He felt his closed eyes heat up and his mouth turn bitter as he switched between quirks, familiarizing himself with them. He could study them, refine them, combine them. Izuku set his pen down with a satisfied sigh and released the quirks. He sat up and reached for the handheld mirror on his desk. He held the mirror to his face and reached out for the quirks he was most familiar with. Every time he called on his glowing eyes quirk, or the one that streaked colors through his irises, it got easier to control them. He could recognize the texture of them, the way they felt differently from the others. He'd been using these 2 quirks since the beginning. By now, he could do it without thinking. His body remembered. Izuku flicked his eyes from green to blue to gold in the mirror. A second later, they glowed faintly like little lanterns, then dimmed. Back and forth, on and off, switch and glow, color and shine. Faster this time, he whispered, flicking again. His reflection blinked back at him, every second with different eyes. Come on, green, blue, yellow, glow, day, again dash. He made himself dizzy, but the pride fizzing in his chest drowned out the exhaustion. Eventually, curiosity tugged him back to the computer. If training made Quirks easier to use, then he had to know how. He skimmed through pro-hero interviews, training blogs, government manuals. Most advice came down to this: train your body, and your quirk will follow. Emitter-type quirks, especially, relied on stamina and strength to keep from burning the user out. The fitter the body, the stronger the quirk. Izuku leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against his notebook. His arms were scrawny. His legs ached if he ran too hard. He wasn't out of shape, but he wasn't in it either. I'll start tomorrow, he decided out loud, setting the pen down. Today's for study. Tomorrow, training. He rubbed his eyes. They were beginning to itch. Maybe changing my eye color that frequently had some quirk overuse side effect? The clock on his wall blinked 10:42 p.m. Had it really gotten that late? With a groan, Izuku closed his laptop, stacked his notebooks neatly, and forced himself to stand. He went through his nightly routine on autopilot. While brushing his teeth, he flicked between glowing and non-glowing eyes so quickly his bathroom lit up like a faulty light bulb. While he tugged his pajamas over his head, his eyes shifted from green to brown to a bright violet, then back to green. When he crawled into bed, he flicked them one last time for good measure, bright white glow, soft green shine, and smiled at the sensation of having a quirk. After years of quirklessness, he still hadn't quite gotten over the fact that he wasn't Kakin called him anymore. He wrapped a few unknown quirks around his core before sleep out of curiosity. Maybe one of them only triggered while dreaming or while unconscious. He couldn't test that while awake. Sleep took him in minutes. Sunday morning dawned with the sound of his mother's voice calling through the door. Izuku, breakfast. He startled awake, rubbing his eyes blearily. For a moment he searched inward. The unknown quirks still buzzed faintly, though none had done anything overnight. With a sigh, he unraveled them and released the threads, feeling his chest lighten. Shuffling into the bathroom, he went through his routine again. This time he didn't glow or shift colors. Just brushed his teeth, combed his hair flat, splashed cold water on his face until he felt awake. When he shuffled into the kitchen, Inko was plating store-bought onigiri on the table. "You're up late," she teased gently. "Were you reading again?" Izuku ducked his head, embarrassed smile tugging at his mouth. Yeah. I lost track of time." She set the plate in front of him and turned back toward the sink. He waited until her back was turned, then tugged at the hydrophobic and paint secretion quirks. They wove together, merging around his core, and a clear liquid seeped from his fingertips. Izuku pressed his hand to the rice ball. The onigiri began to dry out. The moisture leaked out of the food and puddled around it, refusing to seep into the rice. It left the rice stiff, almost crumbly. Izuku's mind spun through possibilities: preservation, dehydration, dangerous side effects. What if it does that to me if I eat it? What if it dehydrates organs, blood, tissue? He wasn't going to risk it. Izuku quietly wrapped the dried-out onigiri in a napkin and slipped it into his pocket before his mother turned around. He smiled as she sat down across from him. "Thanks for breakfast, Mom." "You're welcome, sweetie." She beamed at him, worry soft at the edges of her smile. "Do you want to do anything today? It's Sunday, we could go out, maybe?" Izuku hesitated, then bit his lip. Actually, would it be okay if I went to the beach? Just for a little while. I'll be back by 4. Her brow furrowed faintly. "Alone?" "I'll be careful," he promised quickly. I think better when I walk. I'll bring my notebook." She studied him for a long moment, then sighed and nodded. "All right, but you call me if you need anything, okay?" "Yes, Mom." "Thank you." Izuku wolfed down the rest of his breakfast, then darted back into his room to grab his notebooks. He slipped the dried-out onigiri into a trash bag on his way out. The beach wasn't much of a beach anymore. Garbage piles covered the sand, refrigerators rusting on the shore, mountains of plastic spilling into the waves. Old tires lay tangled with plastic bags, and an entire car frame sat buried on the sand. Izuku adjusted his backpack on his shoulders and stepped down from the sidewalk onto the sand. It crunched beneath his sneakers. The smell of saltwater and rotting trash mixed into something sharp enough to sting his nose. Perfect. Nobody came here. Nobody would catch him here. Izuku set down his notebooks on a relatively flat car door, flipped one open, and clicked his pen. His hands itched to write. His chest hummed. All right, he muttered, scanning the piles around him. Controlled tests first. Start small. He scavenged materials for simple experiments. A crushed soda can, a warped piece of wood, a few plastic bottles. He lined them up in the sand. Test environment prepared. Izuku sat cross-legged in the sand, closed his eyes, and reached inward. The unknown quirks pulsed faintly, a buzzing stream beneath his skin. Izuku let his mind drift back to what had worked before. His eyes. The quirks tied to his vision all felt related. When he first started out, he'd mixed up glowing eyes with eye color more than once. They lived in the same corner of his awareness, vibrating with a shared resonance. Was that coincidence? Or a connection? Izuku leaned into the thought, letting himself sink into it. Heated eyeballs, second eyelid, crosshair overlay, the two that made up his eye mod quirk. They weren't identical, but all carried that same underlying flavor. A common factor. The crosshair one was somewhat of an outlier, a sharper, colder sensation, but it still shared that one similarity. So if quirks grouped together by feeling, maybe he could find new ones by following the common factors. Izuku shut his eyes tighter, diving into the stream of unknown quirks. He searched deliberately for that familiar, eye-related hum. A faint flicker. He grabbed at it. When he opened his eyes, the world snapped brighter. Sunlight off the ocean stabbed at his vision. The colors of the garbage piles jumped sharper. The faded red of a broken toy car gleamed scarlet. The yellow caution sticker on a refrigerator glared neon. Izuku squinted, heart hammering. Too bright. Everything hurt to look at. He dropped the quirk immediately, blinking hard as his vision dimmed back to normal. His pen was in his hand before the afterimages had faded. Hypersensitive vision. Mutation. Surroundings seemed to brighten. Painfully sensitive in broad daylight. Maybe useful in dark environments, further testing needed. Still buzzing with adrenaline, Izuku leaned back in the sand. If his theory was right, this wasn't a one-off. It was reproducible. Testable. The method. He needed to prove it again. His mind shifted to another category, his salivary quirks. Flammable spit. Nauseating spit. Both similar, to an extent. When he felt the quirks, they weren't identical, but they shared a few threads of sensation. There wasn't a clear single difference like there'd been in the eye quirks. He was able to pick out 3 similarities. Not as clean-cut, but enough to work with. He reached for the first factor, combing through the unknown quirks for anything with that feeling attached to it. He found nothing clear. Dead end. Switched to factor 2. There's something faint. Izuku tugged it forward and braced himself. His eyes immediately watered. Tears blurred his vision until drops slid hot down his cheeks. As he looked around for a container to catch his tears, he noricked that it has that same underlying feeling present in his eye quirks. Izuku grabbed one of the scavenged bottles, tipped it against his cheek, and collected a few drops before deactivating the quirk. His face felt damp and sticky. The liquid inside the bottle looked cloudy. Not the usual clear tears. Izuku hesitated, then because he had to know touched a finger to it and liked. Godash. His face screwed up instantly. It was salter than seawater, so sharp it almost made him GG. He turned to his open notebook and grabbed the pen next to it. Extra salty tears. Emitter, probably, may count as mutation if tear ducts were altered. Increases saltiness of tears to an unbearable level. Irritates eyes during and after quirk usage. Common factor between it and salivary quirks seems to be secretion. Still buzzing with excitement and boinking rapidly to get out the irritating tears, Izuku dove back into his quirks, chasing the third common factor from the salivary quirks. He found several faint pulses. Quirks clustered, waiting. Izuku pulled one forward. His mouth flooded with heat, tongue prickling as though he drank straight from a boiling kettle. He grabbed an empty water bottle, spat, and stared. The spit hissed in the plastic. Thin curls of steam coiling upward. Izuku wiped his mouth. His mouth was uncomfortably hot. He cut the cork off, spitting the remaining heated saliva into the sand, and turned to his notebook again. Heated saliva. Emitter modifies saliva secretion. Saliva becomes hot enough to steam and warp plastic. Spit turns red. Quirk prevents heat damage to the mouth, but the sensation of pain remains. Common factor between it and salivary quirks seems to be secretion. He scrawled underneath it, proven theory, quirks have common underlying factors. Shared factors can aid in discovering the use of unknown quirks. Izuku sat back to think about what to do next. He still had some time before he'd have to start training his merged quirks if he wanted to use them competently. He already had a few data points: hydrophobia plus paint secretion, lamination. Flammable spit plus paint plus hydrophobia, fire starter. He'd noticed before that quirks fit together better. Now that he knew about common factors in quirks, he might be able to design better combinations if the rule of factors extended to merging. He reached first for the low-hanging fruit, his quirks. Eye color shifting. Second eyelid. Glowing eyes. Crosshair overlay. Each one had that same underlying feeling. Strings vibrating in the same key. When he tugged on them together, they didn't fight him as much as creating lamination had. They slotted into place, all four overlapping. Izuku's head throbbed as he pulled tighter, weaving them around his core. A bright heat bloomed behind his forehead, vision stuttering like a glitchy camera. His eyes burned and he felt dizzy. He didn't have a chance to test the quirk before the headache hit like a hammer. Izuku gasped, nearly toppling sideways into the sand. His pen clattered from his grip. Every nerve in his skull screamed. No, not again. He dropped the quirks in a panic, peeling them away from his core one by one until the pressure eased. The memory of that week-long agony, the migraine that had almost broken him when his quirks first awakened, poured over him like a bucket of ice water. He wouldn't risk that again. He grabbed his notebook and a pen and scribbled himself a note. 4 or more quirks at once pose a high risk of physical damage. Wait until further control is gained. He underlined it twice, then scribbled, avoid overly difficult quirk merging, may cause relapse. Still panting, Izuku decided to scale back to 2 quirks at a time. Safer. He shifted his focus to the salivary ones, flammable spit and heated spit. The sensation of merging them was smoother than expected. They clicked together like puzzle pieces. His throat felt heavy, chest burning faintly. He braced himself, inhaled carefully through his nose, then opened his mouth to spit a sample of saliva and test what traits the new quirk had inherited. Before he had the chance, a tongue of fire burst outward. It wasn't long, just a foot or 2, but it was enough for Izuku to feel the heat on his face. It roared out with his breath, hot enough to sear the sand black and leave him coughing violently. Izuku doubled over, hacking smoke, chest aching. The flames had vanished, the quirks released, but his lungs still felt raw, like he'd tried to breathe through an oven. But his body wasn't burnt. His lips and tongue weren't blistered. His skin didn't hurt. The quirk insulated him. He scrawled furiously into his notebook. Dragon's breath. Emitter. Lets me briefly breathe fire. Instinctively released hold on quirks due to throat irritation. Tongue of fire is approximately 2 feet long. Grants heat resistance, though the extent of it will have to be tested. It reminded him of his dad. The thrill hadn't worn off, but the headache still throbbed faintly at his temples. Izuku decided to take a break from merging quirks. Instead, he decided to test his capacity. How many quirks could he hold at once? Izuku inhaled, steadying his core, and reached into the buzzing sea of unknowns. One by one, he wrapped them around his core. 10. Still fine. 15. Pressure built, but manageable. 20. His chest ached faintly. His hands trembled. Izuku didn't stop. He forced himself to keep going. 25. The hum of quirks grew sharp, like static crawling beneath his skin. He struggled to keep his eyes open, sweat dripping down his nose. 30. The headache slammed into him. A spike behind his eyes, twisting through his skull. The world tilted, nausea clawing up his throat. Izuku ripped the quirks away, unraveling them in a frenzy until his body sagged limply in the sand. He lay there for a long moment, gulping air, the taste of salt and smoke still thick in his mouth. When he finally sat up, his notebook page was already open, waiting. Capacity test, he muttered hoarsely, hand shaking as he wrote. Comfortable max, 20 quirks. Warning signs start at hard stop at 30, splitting headache, extreme discomfort. Possible hard limit, may be increased with training. Risk of long-term damage if exceeded. Scrawled. Practice holding 20 or more quirks for an extended PRD of time. Izuku set the pen down, staring out at the trash-choked beach. His pulse still pounded, his head still ached. But underneath it was a steady hum of exhilaration. The tide was low when Izuku finally noticed the sun had shifted halfway across the sky. His stomach clenched when he checked the cracked screen of his phone. 3:42 p.m. Crap. He scrambled, scooping up his notebook. Quirk analysis. Izuku Midoriya, it read, from the car door he had rested it on. The words Volume 1 were scrawled in the corner of the cover. Izuku had added it during a short break between tests, at the thought that he was going to need more. One notebook wasn't nearly enough. Izuku grabbed a few plastic bottles of spit samples and the notebook, and then took off towards his house. The jog home took longer than he wanted, but when he finally stepped through the front door, Inko was just tidying the kitchen. She turned at the sound, her face soft with relief. Welcome home, sweetie. Right on time. Izuku's heart eased a little. Yeah, he said quickly, kicking off his shoes. I thought maybe I could cook tonight? Her eyebrows lifted, clearly surprised, but she smiled. Really? That would be wonderful. Thank you, Izuku. He nodded, shuffling past her toward the pantry. His bag felt heavy on his shoulder, the edges of his notebook pressing insistently against his back, waiting for his next entry. Ideas swirled in his head, but for now he'd focus on dinner. The cabinets rattled as he pulled out noodles, broth, dried seaweed. He found the egg carton in the fridge and set it carefully on the counter. His hands were steady as he worked. Muscle memory from helping his mom over the years. Slice, boil, stir. The steam fogged his glasses. Izuku doesn't have glasses. I just forgot what he looked like. My glasses fog up a ton while cooking, so it's just second nature to imagine it being a problem for everyone. He swiped at them with his sleeve, humming faintly under his breath. His mind buzzed with quirks, dragon's breath, hydrophobia, quirk combinations, but the rhythm of cooking soothed him. By the time he ladled the ramen into bowls, the kitchen smelled rich and flavorful. Inko clasped her hands together, her eyes crinkling. It looks amazing, Izuku. He ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased. It's nothing special. They sat across from each other at the small dining table, steam curling up between them. Izuku stirred his noodles absently, sneaking glances at his mom. She looked tired but content, warmth in her eyes as she tasted the broth. It's good, she said softly. Really good. Izuku's chest swelled. He smiled. Thanks, Mom. After dinner, he insisted on cleaning the dishes, waving off her protests. His mind was already half upstairs, itching to get back to his notes, but he wanted to help out some more. Go relax, Mom, he said, stacking the bowls carefully. I'll get this. She lingered in the doorway a moment longer, smiling at him like she wanted to say something, then disappeared into the living room. Izuku let the water run over his fingers, watching the soap suds slip away. The whole time, his mind raced with quirks. When the last dish was drying on the rack, Izuku bolted up to his room. The door clicked shut behind him. He set his bag on the bed, unzipped it, and pulled out the battered notebook. Izuku ran his thumb across the cover before setting it down on the desk. He changed into pajamas, brushed his teeth, washed his face. The normal routine. But his mind wasn't quiet. He slid into his chair, booted up his old laptop, and pulled up the tabs he always returned to: Quirk forums, fan speculation threads, hero watchers message boards. He could have kept reading forever if not for his mom telling him to go to bed 6 hours later. Time flies when your hyperfixation kicks in and you have access to the internet. Izuku, with a sigh, turned off the computer. He'd added a few more theories to his notebook about quirk testing and the mechanics behind quirks. But they'd have to wait until tomorrow. After all, tomorrow was only a day away. The safe house stank of blood, rubble, and rage. Glass vials shattered against the concrete walls as All for One's overgrown arm lashed out, quirks spilling out uncontrolled. Dark lightning lashed out at the room, jagged arcs dancing across the floor and ceiling, the torn remains of a Nomo husk still chained to the operating table. Blades of wind whipped around him, slicing into the machinery that lined the room. All for One stood hunched in the ruin, shoulders heaving, breath rasping through ruined lungs. He raised his hand, reaching inside him for that familiar spark, and nothing happened. He hadn't lost his power. It still moved through him, a vast sea of quirks, countless currents tugging against each other. But one familiar current, one he had known as intimately as the smell of blood, was gone. He reached again, dug deeper, counted every shred of his collection like a miser counting coins. Still gone. No. The word was laced with anger and pain. He tried again, slower this time, careful, methodical. Bone spikes should have been there. The feel of his skeleton twisting, the satisfaction of hardened marrow-breaking skin, the comfort of an ability he'd used 1,000 times. His first mutation quirk. His first inheritance. His mother's quirk. And it was gone. All for One's roar split the air, rattling glass in its frames and sending half-assembled Nomu twitching against their restraints. The good doctor had wisely vacated the premises before All for One had gone into a frenzy. His papers, the ones that didn't make it out in time, scattered across the floor. All for One seized power after power and pushed them outward, lightning, wind shear, telekinetic blasts, destroying Garaki's laboratory in a storm of violence. The reinforced ceiling groaned. Fluid tanks exploded. A half-complete creature sagged and fell apart, its organs sliding wetly across the tiles. When at last the storm abated, he sagged against the wreckage, trembling with fury. His gloved hand curled into a fist so tight it. "I had it," he hissed. "I had it." Bone Spikes was not just another trinket. It wasn't some pathetic novelty quirk to be collected and discarded. It was his tether to the past. The one thing he had kept, not for usefulness, not for strategy, but because it was his mother's. The woman who had carried him to term, had held him and his brother in a dark alleyway while she died, had given him his first taste of power. Gone. Because of a child. He replayed the memory, bringing every detail to the forefront. The brat in the grocery store, wide eyes, freckles, hair like a tangle of weeds. A nobody. A nothing. He had brushed him in passing, slipped quirks into his fragile body the way one might slip poison into a drink. He hadn't cared what went where. The boy was meant to die writhing in agony, a comforting thought to calm him after Garaki's failure. But in that careless moment, in his indulgence, he had cast away one of the only quirks that still mattered to him. His teeth ground audibly. "I will not lose her. Not to some brat. Not to accident." Power flared around him again, rattling shattered tubes and making the air itself tremble. The Nomu carcass nearest him began to shake from it. He forced himself to stillness, to ice-cold focus. Anger was fuel, but only through control. The boy was dead by now. No human could survive that kind of overload. Not even his strongest experiments could hold more than 5. The quirk had died with him. That knowledge didn't ease the fire in his chest. It wasn't enough that the boy had died. If he couldn't reclaim Bone Spikes or destroy the one who stole it, then he would have their family. All for One lowered himself into the chair at the heart of his ruined lab. Fingers moved across the console, bringing up secure channels. 1,000 faces, 1,000 favors owed, 1,000 contacts across Japan and beyond. When they answered, they always did, as no one would be foolish enough to deny a fallen god, would find his voice calm and measured, as though nothing had happened. He would give them a simple order: find the boy. The green-haired brat with green eyes, no older than 14, who had collapsed and died a horrible death from some mysterious illness. find him, trace his family, and uproot their lives. Torture his family and friends. Deliver them to him. And when he held their broken skulls in his hand, perhaps the emptiness where that quirk had once been would hurt a little less. All for one closed his eyes, and for a fleeting second he remembered his mother's face. Smiling, pained, full of sorrow and guilt that she would soon leave them behind. He crushed the memory underfoot. By the end of the week, there would be fresh blood on his hands. 10 months later, all for one had forgotten, and Izuku remained unfound. Such things tend to happen when the corpse you're looking for turns out to be very much alive. The first step to keeping a secret was acting like there wasn't one to begin with. His quirk registration had been a quiet ordeal. He and his mom had gone down to the local office 3 weeks after his powers first appeared. "It lets me change my eye color and sometimes make them glow," Izuku had explained, blinking nervously as the staff clerk scribbled on the form. The clerk didn't bother asking for a demonstration. Izuku gave one anyway, shifting his eyes from green to brown, then flaring them until they faintly glowed. "Cosmetic," the clerk muttered, unimpressed. "Minor light emission. Not combat useful. You'll be listed under Class C." By the end of the appointment, Izuku had his official registration, IMOD. A weak, harmless quirk. The bullying didn't stop. If anything, it worsened. His cover quirk proved what they had all said. He was inherently weak and would never be anything better. Bakugo led the charge, sneering that he was good for was a cheap parlor trick. The teachers turned a blind eye. His classmates laughed along with Kaken about how he was wasting his time with dreams of UA. Izuku swallowed it down. Every insult, every shove into lockers, every note scribbled on his desk he ignored. The beach became his sanctuary. Every weekend morning, Izuku would slip out with his backpack and notebook, telling his mom he was running. Which was true, he did run hard, until his legs ached and his lungs burned. He sprinted across the sand, dragging old tires he'd found, pushing himself through obstacle courses he'd built out of scrap metal and trash. He trained his body because he'd decided to keep his quirks a secret. It'd be a nightmare to be found out. If he was lucky, he'd live out the rest of his life in a lab. When the sun lowered and the shadows grew long, Izuku brought out his quirks. He built quirk tests out of the garbage to test unknowns. Tin cans lined on the hood of a car in hopes he had a projectile quirk. A line of pots in the sand where he spat, tested, and recorded the effects of salivary mutations. A pile of cracked mirrors propped against a beam so he could watch his eyes as they shifted, glowed, turned black, or bled light. Sometimes the quirks activated easily. Sometimes they refused to budge no matter how much he strained. And sometimes they flared out. Izuku learned to carry water bottles, disinfectant wipes, and duct tape whenever he tested unknowns. He had scars on his knuckles, singe marks on his chest, and a bucket of ice water always on hand after he'd set his hand on fire without a fire resistance quirk. But little by little, he made progress. His first notebook filled quickly with neat columns of observations, diagrams, activation triggers, and control notes. Halfway through, he realized how dangerous it would be if anyone ever got their hands on it. He rewrote the whole thing into a personal code. Quirk types became symbols. The feeling of them was represented by the colors of the ink. It was still perfectly legible to him, but to anyone else, it looked like a madman's journal. His mother only knew part of the story. She knew about the training. He told her he wanted to build himself up, prove to the world that even someone with a weak quirk could be a hero. That was true. She encouraged him, though sometimes she fussed over his bruises or tried to sneak extra meat into his meals. She knew he was serious. His weight had shifted from skinny to lean muscle and his figure had filled out. But she didn't know everything that went on at the beach. Izuku hated lying to her, but it was necessary. If the truth got out to anyone else and they slipped up, the best case was that he'd be treated like a specimen in a lab. The worst case was that villains would carve him open to see how he worked. So he kept it to himself. The months passed quickly. School in the morning, training in the afternoon. Quirk testing in the evening, where he filled pages on every new combination he found. By the 3rd month, he could identify the underlying feeling of nearly half his quirks. Now that he knew what to look for, they felt less like a stream and more like a tapestry. The threads weaved together to paint a larger picture he couldn't quite make out. The eye quirks shared a clarity he had marked in his notes as turquoise. The salivary quirks hummed in a way he represented with chartreuse. Some unknown quirks didn't seem to connect to any other, floating in the tapestry like isolated spots of color. He tried combining them sometimes, though not as often as those first few weeks. He was more cautious around them now. 2 at once wasn't bad. After months of quirk training it had become easier to merge 3, but 4 was still unbearable. By the 5th month, he'd amassed hundreds of combinations, some more powerful than the others. He'd gotten lucky with his first few tests. Most of his quirks tended to combine unfavorably. He'd thought that by combining his crosshair quirk with heated spit he might be able to get laser eyes, but all it had done was shift his eyes a darker shade and irritate them. As it got closer to the exam, he started transitioning to physical training. By the 6th month, he had pushed his endurance until he could run the length of the beach twice without stopping. By the 7th, he had filled 2 entire notebooks and was halfway into the 3rd. Each night he sat hunched over his desk, filling page after page in coded handwriting, diagrams that only he understood. He'd started adding what-if sections out of paranoia that someone would find out and try to catch him. Notes on potential counters to his quirks, weaknesses his quirks had, quirks to switch to if the one he was using couldn't cover all bases. He hoped he'd never have to use these plans, but if he did, he'd be prepared. The beach had started to change under his hands. At first, it had just been piles of garbage. But over the months, Izuku had moved them away and cleaned stretches of sand. It gave him a better training ground and made him feel like he was helping. It felt good to help out. It felt good to matter. By month 8, he knew how his quirks worked like the back of his hand. He could recognize what a quirk was from its feeling and predict what unknown quirks might become. Some quirks had faint edges he could detect, like puzzle pieces. When they slotted together, they worked smoothly. Those tended to produce the more powerful combinations. Others clashed like grinding gears. The end result was usually weaker, or in one case, cancelled out. There were failures, like when he combined a frizzy hair quirk with paint secretion and electrocuted himself, or the time he discovered one of his quirks shattered glass while drinking from his mom's favorite mug. But there were successes too. He could breathe fire reliably and switch between quirks on instinct. There weren't many quirks, even accounting for merged ones, that would stand out among a crowd. But there were some. Every success made the danger worth it. The last 3 months sharpened him like a blade. He timed himself on runs across the beach, marking the minutes in his notebook. He tested strength by hauling trash off of the beach. He learned to fight quirkless, in order to keep up the facade that his only quirk was IMOD. He learned simple punches, kicks, grapples, and other things he copied from videos online. The quirks grew easier to summon. It grew easier after every repetition. Eye quirks were easiest because he used them the most often. He could keep them on in the background, letting them stay around his core while he slept. Not every discovery was useful. He logged a sneeze amplifier that made his sneezes sound like small explosions but had no combat value. A quirk that let him turn off his shadow, but only after the sun had set and if he was wearing all black. He wrote them down anyway, because he'd learned something over the past few months. There were no useless quirks. By the 10th month, the beach was nearly unrecognizable. The mounds of trash were smaller. The sand stretched wider and cleaner. Izuku was proud of himself of it. He hadn't cleaned out the entire beach, but that was expected. He'd done enough to make it look presentable again. He stood on the shore one evening, looking at the horizon, the waves pulling against the tide. His notebooks were stuffed with discoveries. He'd trained for months. He knew his quirks inside and out. He was ready. And tomorrow was the entrance exam. The courtyard was buzzing with examinees. Izuku's eyes darted from face to face, catching glimpses of quirks and noting them before his eyes moved to the next. Someone with an extra set of arms, another with ears longer than their head, a girl whose hair looked like vines. And Kaken. Bakugo stood near the steps, hands shoved deep in his pockets, a scowl carved across his face. Students gave him space. He looked like he'd punch someone if they looked at him the wrong way. Izuku's eye brightened. He hadn't had the chance to talk to Kaken in months. Not since that little accident in the stairwell. A smile rose on his face as he started towards the blonde. K-catch dash. He tripped. Bakugo teased to himself without looking back and walked inside. His foot caught on the edge of the pavement and the ground rushed up to meet him. And then everything felt weightless. He blinked in confusion as his body slowed mid-fall, like gravity had forgotten to slam his face into the ground. He twisted his head to see a girl behind him, her hand glowing faintly as it hovered in his direction. "You okay there?" she asked brightly. Her brown hair bobbed around her round face as she smiled at him. Izuku scrambled upright the moment her quirk released, his face blazing red. "Why, thank you, thanks for saving me." The girl laughed, a friendly sound that didn't feel mocking. "No problem. I couldn't just watch you faceplant at the entrance exam, that'd be bad luck. I'm Achiko Uraraka, but just call me Achiko." Izuku's tongue tangled itself into knots. A girl on a first-name basis. His heart thudded in his chest like it wanted to escape. Uraraka-san. I mean Achiko, Uraraka-san. His words tripped over themselves worse than his feet had. She tilted her head but didn't look offended, just amused. "You here for the hero course too?" "Why, that's the dream," Izuku stammered, clutching his bag strap. Her grin widened. "Me too. Good luck to both of us then." Inside the auditorium, the noise of hundreds of students filled the air. Izuku found a seat halfway back, his hands clammy. To his surprise, Uraraka-san took a seat next to him, giving him an encouraging smile. He ducked his head, the heat creeping up his ears. Present Mix's voice boomed through the speakers, electric and alive. "You exam candidates. Are you ready?" Izuku's eyes widened at the pro-hero in front of him. His hand instinctively started writing on air as if he had his notebooks and pencils with him. His mind ran through Present Mix quirk, and stats, and rankings, and his podcast that aired every Tuesdays and Sundays at 7 p.m. and how he was really supportive that everyone could be a hero but didn't really. "You with the curly hair." Izuku blushed as he realized he had started mumbling and turned around. The sharp voice had come from a boy with glasses and perfect posture a few rows back. "You've been mumbling this whole time. Please stop interrupting the presentation." Izuku flinched like he'd been slapped. Sorry," he whispered, folding into himself. Uraraka turned, glaring daggers at the boy, but Present Mike spoke up again before she could say anything. "Listen up. Here's how it's going down. Each group heads to their own testing site. You'll be facing training bots worth different points. 1-pointers, 2-pointers, 3-pointers, you smash 'em, you score." The screen flickered, showing diagrams of the robots. Izuku's eyes lit up as he analyzed what they looked like. Patterns of attack, weak points, likely durability, which quirks would be good against them, how to fight them quirkless. A hand shot up. The same boy who'd yelled at Izuku. His voice snapped Izuku out of his thoughts. "Excuse me, sir. There appears to be a misprint. The image appears to have 4 types of robots, yet you have only described 3. Izuku fought a laugh when the next slide appeared on the screen. 0-pointer. Obstacle only. And lastly, Mike continued without addressing the slightly embarrassed kid, a 0-pointer. Don't waste your time with it, it's just an obstacle. Present Mike covered his smile as he coughed into his fist and looked at the kid. Ahem. As you can see, no misprint. Eyes on the prize, listeners. The boy sat back down stiffly, red-faced. Izuku ducked his head and smiled. For once, it wasn't him making a fool of himself. Under their seats, little slips of paper waited. Izuku bent down to pull his out. Group F, it. Uraraka-san leaned over, showing her own. Hey, I'm F2. Guess we're teammates. Izuku's heart gave a nervous flutter. He nodded quickly, trying not to look too happy. The groups shuffled out into the courtyard, where rows of shuttle buses waited with bold letters painted on the sides. Izuku found bus F and climbed aboard, clutching his bag tightly. Most of the seats filled fast. He spotted a boy with messy purplish hair and dark bags under his eyes slouched near the back, gaze fixed out the window. Izuku hesitated, then gathered his courage and approached. Hey Chai. I'm Midoriya. You're, also in Group F, right? The boy gave him a slow, disinterested look. Yeah. Then he turned back to the window. Oh. Izuku's shoulders slumped. He slipped into the seat across the aisle instead, reminding himself he was used to this. Being ignored was nothing new. But then Uraraka slid into the seat beside him, all smiles. Guess we're riding together too. Izuku managed a small smile of his own. Why? Gee, good luck. They talked in fits and starts as the bus pulled away about nerves, about quirks in vague terms, about how huge you looked up close. Izuku found it easier than he expected to talk to her. Before he knew it, the bus rolled to a stop and the examinees climbed out. The testing grounds stretched wide. Mock skyscrapers loomed against the sky. The examinees grouped together behind the starting line, fidgeting, stretching, muttering nervously. Izuku's mind ran a mile a minute. Designs of the robots, what to prioritize, which quirks he could get away with without exposing himself, how to distance himself from the crowd, if Uraraka would be willing to work together because her quirk, what was it again, would take attention off of himself so he'd get away with more. Present Mike raised a hand, grinning at them from the front. Begin. For a second, no one moved. Everyone was waiting for some sort of countdown, not expecting the exam to begin so suddenly. Izuku didn't hesitate. His legs carried him forward, lungs burning, before his brain had fully caught up. His sneakers slapped against the pavement until he realized no one else was moving. Not a single one. He pivoted, spotted Uraraka-san still frozen near the barricade, and without thinking grabbed her wrist. "See, come on," he blurted, tugging her forward. She blinked in surprise, but she didn't resist. "All right." The two of them broke into a run together, and like a chain reaction, the other examinees snapped out of it and charged after them. The first one-pointer skittered out from an alley, gears whirring. Izuku ran over the plan in his head and searched for the quirks he needed. No time to hesitate. He lunged, brushing his fingertips across its knee joint. Around his core wrapped a weak magnetism quirk and one that made the fruit he touched rot faster. As they merged, the metal seemed to sag under his touch, like fruit left too long in the sun. He clenched his fist and slammed his knuckles straight through the weakened plating. The robot collapsed in a heap, its leg buckling like it had turned into putty. He kept his eyes glowing faintly as he yanked his hand free. The best-case scenario would be if nobody noticed and he got to lie low, but he knew better than to hope for that. If he was called out on it, he could plausibly play it off as mistaking his quirk for being cosmetic and have it re-registered as a strength enhancement. It'd be better to be underestimated than to have someone take an interest in him and look hard enough to find out about his quirks. "Nice one, Izuku." Uraraka cheered, springing forward. She brushed her hand against an oncoming two-pointer and tapped her fingers together. The whole hulking robot lurched upward, its head swiveling as it hovered helplessly. She released it a moment later, letting it crash down in a shriek of metal. Izuku's heart pounded as more machines swarmed the streets. His fists ached. Time to switch tactics. He flexed his hands, calling up another combination while releasing the quirks he had a hold on. Salty tears. Frizzy hair. Always warm palms. It had taken him a while to fully understand the quirk. At first, he thought it had just made his palms sweatier, but its full potential was perfect for this exam. The skin prickled with heat as sweat welled up faster than normal, dripping off of his palms. Static danced across his fingertips. When the next robot lunged, Izuku shoved a hand onto a seam in its chest plating. The electrically charged sweat seeped in. Sparks burst. The machine spasmed violently, then went limp, smoke curling from its joints. Izuku staggered back, shaking out his arms, the stench of burning electronics filling the air. His lungs burned and his fists ached. Another three-pointer creaked behind him. Izuku whirled around and threw up a hand, the sweat on it crackling with electricity. Minutes blurred together in a haze. Izuku lost count of how many robots they downed. His body ached, sweat plastered his hair to his forehead, and Uraraka was still at his side, grinning through the exhaustion. And then the ground started shaking. Dust billowed down the streets as the zero-pointer rolled into view, towering over the rooftops. It crushed buildings, sending rubble falling onto the battlefield. Izuku froze. His eyes flicked to the 0p on its side. He started to retreat in order to pick off bots that were worth something. Ah! His head snapped toward the cry. Uraraka. She was pinned beneath a slab of concrete, debris scattered around her where a wall had collapsed in the chaos. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. She strained against the rubble and put her hand on it but couldn't move it. Izuku recognized the look in her eyes from countless hours on the beach. Quirk exhaustion. His blood ran cold. Achiko! Izuku bolted to her side, ignoring the quake of the 0-pointer's approaching steps. He dropped to his knees, tugging at the rubble with trembling hands. It wouldn't budge. Panic welled in his chest, choking him. He pulled, pushed, every muscle straining. Izuku, get out, it's just an exam dash. No! His voice cracked. No, I'm not, I can't dash. His breath came in ragged bursts. The shadow of the 0-pointer loomed closer. He squeezed his eyes shut. Achiko-san, please, if you see this, don't tell anyone. Please. Her lips parted, confused. CW dash. Izuku didn't let her finish. Izuku had spent weeks trying to figure out how merging his quirks worked. There were a lot of quirk theorists out there that tried to explain how quirks evolved and why some combinations were better than others. He'd eventually started comparing the quirks he merged to parents and the end result to children. Izuku had come across a lot of articles mentioning quirk mutations, where quirks ended up much stronger or unrelated to those of the parents. With the amount of quirks he had, it didn't take long for him to find a mutation of his own. He called on his quirks, seeking out 2 threads in the tapestry, pulling at the picture they made. His palms burned hot. His skin prickled as magnetism reached out to the surrounding metal, sticking small flakes of dust to his skin. He pulled it together. His eyes glinted red. His hair bleached into a pale, sickly green. He pressed his hand against the concrete. It pulverized the moment he touched it. The concrete immediately turned into a fine mist, vaporizing into a fine dust that billowed into the air like smoke. In a moment, the slab was gone. Only a layer of dust clung to his fingertips. Izuku swayed, clutching his head as pain lanced through his skull. His eyes blurred as he released the quirks. When he blinked again, everything was normal, red eyes gone, hair back to its messy green. Achiko stared at him, eyes wide. What was dash? Please, Izuku groaned, clutching his temple. Please don't tell anyone. I'll explain later, just not right now. The shadow swept over them. The 0-pointer's massive treads rolled just meters away, the ground quaking. Achiko grabbed his wrist with trembling hands and tugged. Come on. They stumbled together into the shelter of a nearby building, dust raining down around them as the giant robot thundered past. Neither breathed until the tremors faded into the distance. Izuku slumped against the wall, panting, sweat dripping into his eyes. Achiko knelt beside him, still pale and shaken. She hesitated, lips pressed thin. Finally, she nodded. I won't tell. But you owe me an explanation and your number. Relief crashed over him so hard it hurt. Thank you. The buzzers sounded overhead, Present Mick's voice booming from hidden speakers. Time's up, examinees. Put your hands together. Izuku sagged, every muscle heavy, his head throbbing. He stumbled to his feet. Achiko wrapped his arm around her neck and helped him up. He leaned in gratefully as they stumbled towards the exit. Izuku wiped his palms on his jeans for the 5th time as he followed Achiko up the narrow walkway to her house. The concrete path was cracked in places, weeds poking through, and the fence leaned just slightly to the left, but none of it bothered him. The house was warm and lived in, small but cared for. A wind chime clinked softly on the porch, and potted flowers lined the steps. It felt comfortable. He adjusted the strap of his backpack. Inside was the letter that could decide everything. His entire body buzzed with nervous energy. His heart kept skipping beats. Sorry, it's a little cramped, Achiko said as she slid open the door and stepped inside. I don't usually bring people over. It's fine. Izuku stammered quickly, bowing slightly as he stepped out of his shoes. Really, I don't mind at all. Achiko's voice carried into the hallway. Mom, Dad, I'm home. Midoriya's here too. Her mother poked her head out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, her face lighting up when she saw them. Oh, welcome. Achiko's told us about you. Come in, come in. Izuku gave a stiff, nervous smile and another bow. His mother would be so embarrassed if she saw him fumble like this. They settled in the living room, where the television hummed faintly in the corner. Achiko's father was sitting on the couch. He was a broad-shouldered man with weathered hands. He stopped flipping through channels for a moment, glanced at Izuku, gave a small grunt of acknowledgement, and returned his attention to the screen. Izuku sat carefully on the mat across from Achiko. Both of them had their envelopes in hand. The letter felt heavier than it should have, like it carried the weight of their entire futures. Or because of the heavy metal disc, which, if they sent a hologram to every student or even just the hero students, means UA is filthy rich. Where do they get the funding? Who approves 10-story tall giant robots? Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, so back to the story. Well, Achiko said, drawing in a breath, should we? Izuku nodded, throat dry. They tore the envelopes open at the same time. A metallic clink echoed as identical discs slid out and landed on the table. Izuku's breath caught. A disc. Not just a rejection letter. That had to mean. Achiko picked hers up with trembling fingers. On 3. 1, 2, 3, Izuku echoed, fumbling to press the button. Both discs lit up at once, projecting a bright, towering hologram in the middle of the room. The living room was suddenly filled with the booming voice of none other than, I am here, on screen. All Might announced, striking his trademark pose with both thumbs up. Achiko squeaked. Izuku nearly dropped the disc in shock. Why was All Might himself delivering the results? Was he a teacher? Was he going to be taught by his idol, the #1 hero of Japan? The hologram continued, All Might's grin unwavering. You two young hopefuls have both passed the written and practical examinations of UA High. But I am sure you are wondering, how did you do? The first hologram turned dramatically, arms wide. Midoriya Izuku. You accumulated 45 villain points during the exam. Impressive, yes, but there is more to being a hero than raw combat ability. And so, the projection pointed at Izuku with a gleaming smile. Rescue points are awarded to those who risk themselves to aid others. For saving your fellow examinee from the rubble, you have earned 60 additional rescue points, giving you a total of 105 points. You pass with flying colors, young man. Izuku's jaw dropped. His mind reeled. He had known helping Uraraka was the right thing to do, but rescue points? That put him in the triple digits. He blinked hard, trying not to tear up right in front of her family. Uraraka Achiko, the second hologram said, as the first gave Izuku his points. Achiko's hands tightened around her disc. You scored 28 villain points. But in recognition of your quick thinking, courage, and resourcefulness, 55 rescue points are awarded. For a total of 83 points. Congratulations. Achiko let out a loud, happy laugh, slumping back with relief. Oh my gosh. I did it. The All Might hologram struck one final pose, voice booming. Welcome to your hero academia. The hologram winked out. Silence filled the room for a moment, only broken by the faint buzz of the television. Achiko blinked a few times, then scrambled to her feet, grinning ear to ear. Mom, Dad, I got in. I really got in. Her mother rushed out from the kitchen, pulling her into a hug. I knew you could do it. Her father nodded once, a smile tugging at his lips as he finally set the remote aside. That's my girl. Achiko turned, still beaming, and grabbed Izuku's wrist. Midoriya. You too. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck, blushing furiously. Why, I guess I did. I did. Can we go celebrate? Achiko asked breathlessly, turning to her parents. Just for a little while? Down at the beach. Her father glanced at Izuku. That where you're headed to, kid? Achiko looked at him expectantly. Izuku swallowed and nodded. Yeah, I go there every day. To help clean it up. It's kinda my training ground. Her father grunted approvingly. Hardworking. Good lad. His eyes narrowed faintly, and his tone shifted. He squinted at Achiko. Bring protection. Achiko squeaked like a tea kettle, her entire face turning bright red. Dad. Izuku blinked, head tilting. Protection? Oh sure. There's a lot of broken glass around there, so I usually wear gloves. Don't worry. Her mother smacked her husband's arm with the towel, muttering under her breath. Achiko hid her face in her hands, still red as Izuku cheerfully got to his feet. Come on, Achiko-san. It's not Kaido Beach, but it's great for training. Still mortified, she let herself be dragged out the door. Dagoba Beach stretched out in front of them, the sun glinting off the waves. Piles of garbage still dotted the sand, but compared to what it had been months ago, it looked almost clean. Wide swathes of open sand were more common than broken-down machinery nowadays. This is where you've been training? Achiko asked, blinking in surprise. Izuku nodded, pride slipping through his shy smile. It was a lot worse when I started. I've been clearing it out little by little. Achiko smiled faintly, taking a seat on the sand. So, what exactly are we doing again? Izuku rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. I want to show off a little. This stuff dash, he made his eyes glow and lit the tips of his index fingers on fire, isn't very impressive. I want to show you what I've learned. He set his backpack down and started dragging out from piles of garbage what looked like a collection of scrap wood and makeshift dummies. He set them upright in staggered positions, making sure no two dummies were too close together. Achiko watched with curiosity as he stepped back, scanning the field like a general surveying a battlefield. Izuku's muttering started up, words spilling out as he traced invisible paths in his mind. If I go for the left one first, I can chain into the second, 2, no 3 feet away, with the weakened metal, no, flashy quirks, firestarter finger flame. If I test the electrified sweat at mid-range, no, not robots, no use, just flashy, maybe it'd char the metal, better to save that for a better enemy. Misty tears, merge, pulverize the third or fourth, maybe even second, chain them. Achiko tilted her head, listening with half a smile. It was impressive how his mind worked. She quickly gave up trying to follow along. Izuku's muttering cut off. His eyes sharpened, glowing faintly in the sun. And then he lunged. The sand exploded under his sneakers as he charged the first dummy, fists, quirks stirring in his chest. Achiko had seen him mutter before, of course. During the exam, she'd caught the edges of his rapid-fire analysis under his breath as they fought side by side. But this was different. Here, on a mostly empty stretch of sand, the sound of the waves filling the quiet, Izuku Midoriya wasn't trying to restrain himself. He was letting her see how his brain worked at full speed. Izuku darted forward at the first dummy, a makeshift scarecrow with a battered metal pot for a head. His fist clenched, quirks already shifting into place. She saw a faint flicker in his eyes as he reached out to 2 of his quirks and wrapped them tightly around his core. Izuku's knuckles cracked against the pot with it. Sound like tearing foil. Instead of bouncing off, his hands sank through. The metal tore like paper. It bent under the punch and ripped apart. Izuku didn't pause. The moment he released the quirk, his fingertips were slick with a black, oily substance. It took him an instant to switch between quirks. He pumped a few drops of the fire started across the inside of the pot as he pulled back, then immediately flicked his fingertips. A small flame leapt into being at the tip of his fingers, and the dummy's head burst into roaring fire. Achiko's mouth fell open. All of that, too fast to count, had taken less than a second. Izuku stepped back from the burning dummy, shaking his fingers to dry them off. His chest rose and fell quickly, but his eyes were bright, alive. 3 merged quirks, he said, grinning sheepishly as he turned toward her. 7 total, if you count the base quirks I needed to make them. Achiko blinked. 7? He shrugged, almost bashful, as though it wasn't the wildest thing she'd ever heard. It's easier if I prep the merges beforehand. Otherwise it takes longer. Before she could ask what prep meant, he was already moving again. The next dummy was taller, with a torso made from stacked crates. Izuku sprinted at it, quirks flickering across his body. His eyes began to glow faintly, a soft golden light spilling from them. Steam hissed from his tear ducts, curling into the air like mist. Hachiko braced for some destructive attack, but it didn't come. Instead, the quirks merged into a strange harmony, and as Izuku kicked the dummy's crates hard enough to splinter the planks, his entire body left behind a shimmering trail of light, green and red and gold twining together in the air. It lingered like an aurora before fading. He straightened, panting, hair falling into his glowing eyes. "Doesn't really do anything," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "But it looks kind of cool, right?" Hachiko found herself smiling. "Yeah, cool is an understatement." Izuku's grin widened. Then, more serious, he reached inward again. She could see it in his expression. His hair lightened, color bleeding out of it until it was snow-white. His eyes turned crimson, glowing faintly like embers. Hachiko remembered this one. She'd seen it just a week before. The dummy didn't stand a chance. Izuku reached out a single hand and touched the crate torso. Instantly, it collapsed into nothing, just a faint drifting mist that the wind carried away. Hachiko tilted her head. That's the one you used during the exam, isn't it?" Izuku turned back toward her, sheepish again, rubbing at his temple as if his head ached. His hair and eyes slowly reverted. "Yeah, I call it pulverize. It's one of my strongest, but I don't like using it too much. The headache afterwards is bad." She tilted her head, studying him. "Why does it turn you albino?" That was all the opening he needed. Izuku's nervousness melted into excitement. His voice picked up speed as he launched into his explanation. "So, I compare quirks to inheritance. Think of two base quirks like two parents. When I merge them, the new quirk is like their child. Sometimes it looks almost exactly like one parent, sometimes it's a balanced mix. And sometimes," his eyes brightened, hands gesturing wildly, "sometimes the quirks don't quite fit together. Like, crosshair eyes and heated palms. Watch." He shut his eyes for a moment, quirks flickering around his core, and when he opened them, faint red crosshairs overlapped his pupils. He pressed his palms together, faint heat shimmered between them. When he merged them, his hands looked a little darker, a faint tan blooming across his skin. Izuku dropped the quirks with a sheepish shrug. "That's it. Pretty weak." Hachiko laughed softly. "That's a little underwhelming." "Exactly. Sometimes they just don't combine well." He perked up, moving his hands as he explained. "But sometimes, very rarely, the merge causes a mutation, a quirk that doesn't resemble either parent at all. And when that happens," he gestured to his hair, tugging at a green strand, "you usually see physical changes. White hair, red eyes. Like a marker." "So pulverize was one of those mutations?" Izuku nodded vigorously, a grin tugging at his lips. "Yeah. The parent quirks were weak magnetism and warm palms, and somehow it mutated into, well, that pulverize. A quirk that reduces matter into mist on contact." His voice dropped, almost reverent. "I've read about quirk mutations. They're super rare and powerful. But actually having one," he trailed off, flushing. "Sorry, I'm rambling." Hachiko shook her head, smiling warmly. "Don't apologize. It's really amazing, Izuku." He blinked at her, caught off guard, cheeks reddening. For a second he didn't know what to say. Then his muttering started up again, words tripping over each other as he rubbed the back of his neck and turned toward the next dummy. "Alright, so, back to training dash." He darted forward, quirks already swirling, and Hachiko leaned back on her hands, watching. Watching the boy who dragged her out of the rubble without hesitation, who rambled about quirks like a scientist, who carried a myriad of powers inside him and still blushed when someone praised him. Watching as he threw himself into battle with a focus and fire that she'd seen in countless heroes. Hachiko's smile widened. Yeah. He was amazing. The train ride had been quiet, but Izuku's head wasn't. His mind was buzzing. His knee bounced furiously as he clutched his notebook, Quirk Analysis, Izuku Midoriya, Volume 4, against his chest. The cover was soft around the edges from him fiddling with it nervously. He checked the time on his phone again, then the map, then the time. The walk from the station to UA felt like forever. When he reached the massive gate, he looked up in awe, staring up at the golden letters shining in the morning sun. UA High. The place he'd dreamed about going to since he was little. His chest was tight and his hands were sweaty. He forced himself to calm down. He waited for a while. Students trickled past him, some alone, some in groups, chatting excitedly. Izuku shifted his weight nervously, checking his phone again. A message pinged. Achiko, sorry. Running a bit late, don't wait for me. He stared at the screen a moment, smiled, and typed back quickly. Izuku, no problem, I'll see you in class, smiley face. Gathering himself, Izuku pushed through the gates and walked toward Class 1A. The classroom was surprisingly normal. It bore some resemblance to Aldria, but unlike there, he had a quirk. And a friend. The first thing that caught his attention was the noise. What the hell are you staring at, Four Eyes? Izuku's eyes darted to the front row. Kaken was sitting with his feet propped arrogantly on the desk, snarling at a boy with glasses and a stiff posture. The boy was scolding him about respecting school property. Izuku ducked his head, muttered, "Excuse me," and shuffled past them quickly, his notebook pressed tight to his chest. He scanned the room. Not many people were here yet. He took a seat near the front, second row, trying not to draw attention. That failed. Kaken's eyes locked on him immediately. For a moment, Izuku braced himself for the usual explosion of insults. But instead, Bakugo's lip curled, he huffed through his nose and turned away. He stomped to the back of the room and dropped into a seat, ignoring the other boys' indignant protests. Izuku blinked. That was unexpected. He barely had time to process before the bell rang. Achiko slipped in just before it, scanning the room in a hurry. Izuku lifted his hand in a small wave. She lit up when she spotted him and hurried over, plopping down in the desk beside his with a relieved grin. Then something stirred at the front of the room. Izuku nearly yelped when a giant yellow caterpillar rose from the floor. Its zipper peeled back, and a tired-looking man with messy hair and dark circles under his eyes stepped out. "Who?" Izuku whispered to himself. "I'm your homeroom teacher," the man said flatly, hands stuffed in his pockets. "Shota Aizawa. Let's skip the introductions. Go change into your P uniforms and meet me outside." Someone started to protest, a girl with pink skin, but Aizawa cut them off. "We're doing a quirk evaluation. Last place gets expelled." The whole room froze. Aizawa's expression didn't change. "What? You thought becoming a hero was going to be all smiles and rainbows? Life is unfair. Get used to it." The field smelled like new turf. Students milled around nervously in their fresh uniforms. Aizawa barely gave them time to settle before tossing a ball to Bakugo. "Back in middle school, you all should have taken physical exams. Here at UA, we train you to become heroes. And heroes use their quirks. Bakugo, come up here." Aizawa gestured to a circle drawn in the ground. Bakugo grinned. "Throw the ball as far as you can. Anything within the circle counts." Bakugo's grin was feral. He cracked his shoulders, wound up, and with a deafening explosion, blasted the ball high into the air. The machine Aizawa had beeped. 706 meters, Aizawa read. The class erupted in murmurs. Izuku glanced at Achiko. She seemed more determined than worried. He drew strength from that. For the 50-meter dash, Aizawa paired Izuku against the glasses kid. "I am Ida Tenya," he introduced stiffly, bowing slightly. "It is an honor to compete with you. Let us both strive for our best." "Why?" Izuku said nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. He glanced at Aizawa. Sir, just to be clear, anything goes as long as it's within the track?" Aizawa gave him a long, lazy blink, wondering what this problem child would come up with. "Yes." The signal blared. Izuku immediately lunged sideways and tackled Ida, wrapping his arms around the other boy's neck. "What are you doing?" Ida yelped, stumbling forward. His engines roared as he tried to shake Izuku off. Izuku clung tighter, his legs wrapped around Ida's waist, muttering apologies as they barreled down the track together. They crossed the line. The machine in Aizawa's hand beeped. "Ida, 4.01 seconds. Midoriya, 4.02. Ida ripped Izuku off, sputtering furiously. This is completely unheroic. It's sabotage. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck, red-faced. Sorry. I couldn't match you in speed dash. Aizawa cut him off. It was within the rules. Midoriya utilized what he had. You'll find heroes often have to do the same. Ida nearly choked on his outrage. Izuku muttered more apologies. In grip strength, Izuku didn't try anything. He had a few quirk combos that boosted his physical strength, but he figured it would be a bit suspicious for a kid with an eye modification quirk to crush the machine. In the standing long jump, they went 2 at a time. Aizawa paired Izuku with Achiko. "Want to do the thing?" she whispered, eyes sparkling. He nodded quickly. They crouched. Achiko tapped his arm. Both of their bodies felt weightless. They launched, soaring far over the sand pit, clearing it easily. They came down hard on the grass beyond, tumbling into a heap. Several classmates protested. Aizawa didn't blink, but if anyone who knew him were watching, they would have caught the slight quirk of his mouth when his eyes fell on Midoriya. Still within the rules. The repeated side steps were normal. Izuku did fine. Then came the ball throw. Izuku glanced at Achiko. "See, could you, maybe help me out?" She grinned. "Of course." He wound up and threw as hard as he could. Achiko's fingers brushed the ball mid-flight, her quirk flickering on. The ball floated up into the sky, and didn't stop. The machine blinked. Infinity. Aizawa struggled to keep his smile down. He tugged the scarf up higher to cover it. This was certainly going to be an interesting year. The tests went on for a while after that. Izuku took first overall. He and Achiko were the only ones with infinite points, but he edged just ahead of her because of his dash and grip strength. Achiko grinned at him, not disappointed. If anything, she looked proud. At the end, Aizawa scanned his students. He hadn't actually planned on going through with his threat, but the kid in last place gave him a bad feeling. Aizawa had learned to trust his gut when it came to teaching. That, and he had caught the pervert trying to look up Yaoyuruzo's skirt. Aizawa's eyes flicked toward the kid with weird purple hair that looked like boba pearls. "Mineta, you're expelled." The grapist perverted BSTRD fatherless bitch face excuse of a human dressed up shithole kid's eyes went wide. "You can't do that." Aizawa's eyes glowed a menacing red. His scarf began to float. Mineta paled at the wordless threat and stalked off towards the building, grumbling to himself. Wait, was he really last? Izuku whispered to Achiko. Did Hagakure even do anything? Hagakure, putting her clothes back on after skipping half of the tests and faking her scores, just giggled. Guess we'll never know. Nobody knew her actual numbers, and there was no real way of disproving her claim that she ran 50 meters in half a second. The second morning at UA felt easier than the first. Izuku didn't get lost this time, and his nerves weren't quite so explosive. He lingered a little at the front gates, waiting for Achiko. He spotted her a few minutes later, waving over the crowd. Izuku waved back and smiled to himself. He had friends. Actual friends. Morning, Izuku. Achiko said as she reached him, all smiles. Izuku turned back to the gates and started walking into UA with her. Hey, Achiko. Achiko lightly bumped her arm into his as they walked. Izuku couldn't tell if it was intentional or not, but he hoped it was. He wondered if this fuzzy feeling was the product of one of his unknown quirks he had wrapped around his core. The feeling carried him all the way up to the Class 1A door. The room was noisier than yesterday. Friend groups had begun forming around the room. The atmosphere was lighter and more casual than before. Izuku slipped in quietly and found his desk next to Achiko. She slid into her seat, setting down her own bag. So, you look more awake than yesterday. I, slept better. Still kinda nervous though. Me too, she admitted. But that's normal. It's crazy. Her easy grin helped unknot some of the tension in his chest. They fell into small talk for a few minutes, about the cafeteria food, about how big the campus was, about how they still didn't know most of their classmates' names. Izuku paused mid-sentence when he noticed a yellow sleeping bag begin to squirm through the door. The room went quiet as it slithered to the front, and out popped Aizawa, scowling like he'd been awake for weeks on end. "Quiet," he said flatly. The noise dropped from quiet to silence. "Today, your first class is Foundations of Heroics, which I think is far too dangerous for you problem children, but the idiot thinks it's fine and the rat's insane enough to back him up. You'll be learning what it means to apply your quirks in combat scenarios." Achiko perked up next to Izuku at the thought of getting to show off her quirk. Izuku mulled over which quirks he could secretly use without giving anything away. Aizawa yawned, tugging the sleeping bag back up over his shoulders. "I won't be teaching this one. The blonde idiot will. I'm leaving before he shows up." Kaminari raised a hand. "What do you mean by the blonde idiot?" Aizawa treated Pikachu to a glare that could kill. The Pokemon in question shrank into his seat. "You'll know." With that, Aizawa shuffled out, blanket trailing, leaving the class wondering who would teach them. Izuku wondered if it was Present Mike. But that didn't make sense. He had English with 3A around this time. There was a moment of quiet while the door swung closed. Then the door slammed open again with enough force to rattle the windows. "I am here," a booming voice declared. "Coming through the door. Like a normal person." The students nearly jumped out of their seats. All Might. Izuku's brain short-circuited at his favorite hero, Japan's #1, right in front of him. His notebook was out of his bag before he realized what he was doing. His pencil was already scratching notes on an empty page. 8:35 a.m., biceps circumference unchanged from media reports, voice projection still consistent, posture slightly different when indoors versus outdoors, might be socially inept from being an untouchable symbol of peace because who unironically comes through a door like that? Not that I'm criticizing him, it's fine to be socially inept because All Might is perfect and… "Midoriya," Achiko whispered, leaning over. He didn't hear her. His muttering was in full swing now, words tumbling out too fast to follow. Outfit is his Silver Age costume. Design may be edited from classic silver to adapt for teaching. Must search up Silver Age All Might on Hero Watchers and cross-reference it with a sketch for possible costume updates. A finger jabbed his arm. "Izuku," Achiko said again, more firmly. "Write it down, you can rant to me later." He blinked up at her, cheeks going scarlet. Sorry." All Might's booming laugh carried over the room. "Young man, I appreciate the enthusiasm. Save the analysis for the field. It's quite a gift you have there." Izuku wanted to melt into the floor, preferably forever, after he got an autograph and maybe a selfie. All Might clapped his hands together, regaining the class's attention. "Today we begin the battle trials. You've had a taste of using quirks in the physical evaluation yesterday. Now you'll learn how to apply them in real combat situations against each other." A section of wall to Izuku's left hissed and split open. Numbered cases rolled out on rails, stopping neatly in a row. "Your costumes, custom made from the designs you submitted with your applications." All Might declared dramatically, striking a pose. "Put them on and meet me at ground beta." All Might grinned at the class, teeth shining wide, and ran out the door. Ida broke the silence first, standing up and chopping his arms robotically. "The changing rooms are by ground beta. Grab your cases and form an orderly line so that we may all arrive at the grounds timely." Everyone made a mad dash for their cases and pushed past each other in a race to get to the changing rooms. Poor Ida was very distressed by the lack of order. The boys' changing room was full of chatter. Izuku ducked into his case, pulling on the suit carefully. It was vaguely reminiscent of All Might. The green jumpsuit fit snugly. He designed the mask to be practical, functioning as a gas filter, and also mimic All Might's smile. The padding in his knees and elbows was firm. The white gloves were thicker than he would have liked, but he could always get that fixed up later. His red boots were designed to conform to his extra toe joint. Izuku tugged the hood up, the rabbit ears flopping forward. His heart thudded in pride. He felt like a hero. Izuku glanced around. Kaminari looked like a punk rock fan at a concert loud enough to shake the walls. Kirishima was hyping himself up in the mirror, flexing and yelling about manly vibes. Ida stood rigidly in his gleaming white armor. Izuku, reminded of one of his favorite heroes, couldn't help blurting out, "That, it looks just like Ingenium's armor. Wow, it's, a really accurate cosplay." Ida turned, blinking rapidly and blushing faintly with embarrassment. "It is not Dash. This is not cosplay. Ingenium is my brother. This is family pride, not Dash." Kirishima turned away from the mirror, burst into laughter. "Bro, he's right, it's totally an Ingenium cosplay. You're identical." Izuku's face flamed. Sorry. I didn't mean it like Dash." Before he could spiral further, a sharp cuff landed on the back of his head. Not hard, but firm enough to snap him out of it. "Stop apologizing so much, nerd," Kaken muttered, brushing past him toward the door. Izuku froze, waiting for the other shoe to drop, but the blonde just walked out the door without turning back. He rubbed the spot on his shoulder sheepishly, muttering a quiet, "Right?" Ground beta stretched before them on the monitors like a miniature city, full of looming buildings and narrow streets. Izuku and the rest of 1A were in the waiting room. A door on the right led to the changing rooms, and a door on the left led to ground beta. Izuku's nerves spiked again as his eyes flicked over the screens, but he also couldn't help the thrill that ran down his spine. He was training to be a hero. All Might stood at the center, cape billowing dramatically in the wind coming from a broken AC unit. "Now that you're suited up, let's review," he boomed. "This is a battle simulation. Heroes versus villains. The villains will guard a weapon of mass destruction, while the heroes must capture it or defeat the villains. Simple. Yet in this simplicity lies the foundation of real combat." The class leaned forward, hanging on his every word. "We'll assign roles randomly." All Might gestured, and the massive monitor blinked to another screen. Names and numbers shuffled into teams. And remember, teamwork is key. The first two teams were called to fight. The class gathered around screens to watch. Izuku, as always, analyzed everything. His notebook came from nowhere and a pencil magically appeared in his hand. Achiko wondered if notebook summoning was one of his hidden quirks. Izuku had months of data on quirks and fighting styles. He went from one classmate to the next, reviewing their technique and writing suggestions, if he ever worked up the courage to talk to them. The way Kaminari fought baffled him. He fought as if his quirk was to shoot lightning, but from what Izuku could see, it was more of a human taser. And the self-inflicted brain damage was quite alarming. Yaoyorozu had obvious self-confidence issues. She hesitated too long while fighting. Izuku recognized the way she stood from the mirror he woke up to every day. She needed to be more confident. Her quirk was amazing, but only if she could use it correctly. Even so, it was impressive how she managed to win a 1v2. Achiko eventually nudged him out of his muttering. "You're taking this really seriously." Sorry, I know it's weird," he mumbled back. Quirks are really cool to me, and it's creepy but Dash." Her laugh broke through his spiral. Izuku looked up at it. It had been a long time since he'd heard a laugh like that from someone other than his mother. It didn't sound teasing or condescending. It was almost encouraging. "You're kind of amazing, Midoriya." His face turned pink. He ducked his head back into his notes. When the match had concluded and Kaminari had been shipped off to Recovery Girl, All Might's voice thundered across the training grounds. "In the next match, Midoriya and Uraraka will be the heroes. Ida and Bakugo will play the part of the villains." Izuku's stomach dropped straight to the floor at the thought of facing Bakugo. Achiko gave him a quick thumbs up. "We got this." He forced a shaky smile. "Why yeah." The pairs separated, heading for their starting zones. As Izuku and Achiko stepped out onto the training ground, the buildings looming overhead, his mind whirled with strategies. Izuku's brain immediately shifted into overdrive. Ida, speed quirk. Unknown top speed and turning control. Related to Ingenium, so it wouldn't be a stretch to take his stats and have them to get a rough estimate of his brother. Kaken, at least he wouldn't be difficult to analyze. Izuku had plenty of notes on explosion. They had 5 minutes to plan. Izuku's pencil flew across his magically summoned notebook as he muttered half-formed thoughts. "Bakugo will definitely go on the offensive. He won't be able to resist, he'll come charging, probably towards me because wait no, he's been acting weird lately, avoiding me, so he'll probably go towards you, but he might double back if he thinks I'm sneaking dash. Izuku, Achiko cut in gently. She was crouched across from him. It's already been 4 minutes. He froze. Alright. Sorry. Her grin saddened a bit at his downcast gaze. She wondered why he felt the need to apologize so often. It looked like he'd been bullied in the past. No need to apologize. Just run me through the short version. Izuku forced himself to slow down and condense it. Kaken will hunt. He's not good at staying put. Ida will guard the bomb. You'll probably be the target. Kaken's been avoiding me. If I'm wrong and you're up against Ida, get him weightless. It'll throw him off balance. If I can get to the top floor quickly, I can work my way down to face Ida. All that's missing is dash. Achiko's eyes lit up with understanding. You need a way to get to the top floors fast without getting caught. Exactly. He thought for a moment, running over the plan in his head, words mumbling faster than Achiko could process. Izuku stopped and looked up again. Can you throw me? Her head tilted. Throw you? If you make me weightless, Izuku said, the words coming fast as the clock ticked down, you could toss me to the roof. There's probably an access door. I could slip in upstairs while you take the main entrance. Divide and conquer. It was risky, Izuku knew, and hinged on there being a door at the top. Achiko's lips curved upward in a grin anyway. I like it. When All Might shouted, begin, the air was vibrating with tension. Achiko didn't hesitate. She placed her fingertips against Izuku's chest, activated her quirk, and suddenly his stomach was floating freely inside of him. The sensation was nauseating and disorienting, but he gritted his teeth and let her get a good grip before hurling him upward. The roads blurred beneath him. For a moment he thought he might overshoot and go sailing into the clouds, but Achiko's timing was perfect. She released her quirk just as he reached the top. Izuku's momentum kept him going for a few feet. He landed hard on the building's rooftop, rolling to absorb the impact. He lay there for a second, catching his breath and scanning the roof. Sure enough, there was a door. Izuku scrambled to the edge, peering down. Achiko was still waiting just in case it didn't work out and she had to catch him. Izuku gave her a thumbs up. Time to work. The rooftop door had a padlock. Izuku crouched, hiding what he was doing from the camera in the corner of the roof, and reached into the tapestry of quirks. He brushed against one that he'd tagged months ago. The lock-picking quirk slid into place around his core. Izuku inspected the lock. It was metal, smaller than his hand. On the bottom was room for a key. Just to make sure it qualified, Izuku shut his eyes and let them adjust. After a few moments, a faint red outline of the lock appeared. He opened his eye and wrapped his hand around the metal, shielding the lock from the camera. There was a faint click before the lock opened. Izuku pulled open the door quietly and slipped inside. If anyone asked, he could always say it was a lockpick he had added to his costume. Actually, that was a good idea. Maybe he should have a lockpick in his costume. It'd be useful for situations where brute strength couldn't solve everything, or maybe if he was captured as a hero, or maybe. His thoughts shattered with the impact of a metal boot slamming into the side of his face. The world spun. Izuku stumbled backward, barely catching himself on the wall. Blood trickled out of his nose. Villains do not permit intruders to simply wander in, a voice barked, echoing a bit in the tight hallway. Ida. Izuku blinked through the sting and sure enough, there he was, pipes smoking faintly, armor gleaming. His stance was rigid. Maybe the costume impeded his movement. Izuku dropped low into a fighting stance he'd practiced for months on Dagobah Beach. Ida lunged again, engines flaring, fist clenched, ready to deliver a brutal punch. But Izuku had been observing, ready to exploit even the smallest weakness he found. He had noticed it after the first kick. There was a fraction of a second where Ida's speed worked against him, where halting and redirecting his movement left him open for a second. Izuku stepped back at the last possible moment. Ida's punch flew through empty air, stumbling a bit as it didn't land as he had expected it to. Izuku seized the window. He grabbed Ida's collar, pulled him down, and slammed a knee into his face. The blow landed in the center of Ida's face. The taller boy stumbled, engine sputtering, helmet visor cracked. Izuku didn't waste the opening. He yanked the capture tape from his belt and looped it around Ida's torso, pinning his arms tight to his sides. Ida didn't fight back, too disoriented from the blow. He sagged to the floor, groaning through what sounded like a bloody nose. Izuku took a moment to rest, chest heaving. His eyes widened as the adrenaline died down and he realized what he'd done. I'm sorry, he blurted out, crouching down. I didn't mean to, well, I did mean to, but not to, oh man dash. Ida groaned again. Izuku winced. His stomach twisted with guilt, but he shook it off. Recovery Girl would take care of him. One villain down. That left Kaken. Izuku's footsteps echoed through the sterile hallways of the mock building, his breath coming fast and shallow. Every corner could hide an ambush. Every doorway might have a weapon of mass destruction inside. Or the bomb. Focus, he told himself. The bomb is the objective. All Might said nothing about needing to beat or even meet both villains. Just secure the bomb. That was a critical detail. Izuku had seen hundreds of hero fights where the heroes got caught up in the fight and forgot the goal. Izuku wouldn't make that mistake. He darted into a stairwell, doubled back when he realized there was a door he hadn't checked, and slid into what looked like a conference room. A black bomb, cartoonishly out of place and evil-looking, sat on a pedestal. Izuku broke into a sprint, and the floor in front of him exploded. Concrete dust filled the air as a smoking hole blew open in the floor. Izuku stumbled back, coughing, and through the haze a shape rose, followed by the cracks and pops of his quirk. Ash blonde hair. Red eyes burning a hole through he dust. Kaken. Izuku's blood went cold. His heart thundered in his ears. Every muscle in his body screamed to run, to curl up, to brace for impact. He'd been here before, so many times. He instinctively recoiled and took a step back, bracing for the fists, the jeering, the star-shaped scars littering his arms and legs from when Bakugo had held him down and scorched off his skin for him. His body knew the routine. Bakugo's mouth opened. His lips twisted, but not into a sneer. If Izuku didn't know better, didn't know that it was impossible, he'd say it was regret. Dik eyes a dash. And then he was pulled back down through the hole. Achiko gripped onto Bakugo tightly, tackling his legs and dragging him down with his weight. The boy let out a strangled curse as they both tumbled through to the ground, his explosions not enough to keep both of them afloat. Izuku froze for a moment, stunned that for once in his life, someone had come to help. Then his brain caught up. Opportunity. He bolted forward, legs pumping. Izuku skirted the edge of the hole, heart in his throat, and slammed his palm down on the bomb. A buzzer blared overhead. The hero team wins. All Might's voice boomed over the intercom. Izuku gasped, his body sagging with relief. His hands trembled as the adrenaline began to ebb. They'd done it. They'd won. Against Kaken. In Bakugo's earpiece, All Might added cheerfully, and could young Bakugo please retrieve and untie young Ida? 2 corridors down from the bomb, I believe. Thank you. Bakugo snarled, shoving Achiko off and blasting himself back up through the hole. Teeth, whatever. He stomped toward the hall, shoulders tight with fury, explosions sparking faintly at his palms. Izuku kept his head down as he passed. No point in inviting Kaken's wrath now. Achiko floated herself through the hole and landed beside him, brushing dust from her uniform. Her smile was tired but bright. We did it. Izuku couldn't stop the grin spreading across his own face. Tentatively, he lifted his hand. She slapped it with hers. A sharp crackle filled the air. Her hand turned purple. They both froze, Izuku more panicked than she was. Achiko blinked at her fingers, twisting them slowly in front of her. That's new. Izuku's face went crimson. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to, oh no, this is bad, I dash. Panicked, he reached inward, fumbling with the cluster of faint sparks that circled his core. The unknown quirks he kept wrapped around him at all times, just in case he stumbled upon an activation requirement. One loose, then another. One by one he let them all drop. Achiko's hand shimmered and returned to normal. She flexed her fingers experimentally, then looked up at him with her head ped. Not angry, just curious. Izuku swallowed, heat crawling up his neck. All Might's voice was still booming over the intercom somewhere distant, praising their teamwork. Izuku reached up, yanked the earpiece out, and gestured for Achiko to do the same. She did, head tilted. He leaned in close, voice low. I keep a bunch of quirks active all the time. Ones I haven't figured out. Sometimes they need a trigger. A word, a gesture, contact. One of them must have accidentally activated. When we high-fived. His fingers twisted nervously in front of him. I didn't mean to use it on you, I swear. I was just testing. Accidentally. I won't do it again, sorry dash. Achiko cut him off by grabbing his hand. Izuku's face went scarlet at the touch. It's okay, but you should be more careful. What if that had happened to someone else, like All Might? She suppressed a grin at the thought of Purple Might saving the day. If you ever want to test out some unknowns, just call me. Testing them in public is too risky. Izuku's breath caught. It was strange having someone to rely on. Someone who wouldn't push him away or laugh in his face. His throat tightened. Why? Thanks, Achiko. She offered him another small smile, this one softer. Still, maybe warn me next time before you make me purple? Izuku's laugh came out shaky, but genuine. Deal. Bakugo teased to himself as he walked past Izuku and went to get Ida. A few steps down, he heard a crackle in the air. Bakugo turned around and took a look around the corner. Round Face's hands were purple and Izuku looked panicked. As he watched, the girl's hands turned back to normal. He strained to listen in, but they were too far for him to eavesdrop. Bakugo turned away after a moment and went to pick up his classmate. That was weird.